everybody to the Tuesday, June, almost said January, June 9th, 2020 regular Board of County Commissioners meeting. I'm gonna just give some instructions for our audience before we start. So we are in our virtual meeting format, and for the public watching, when you're registered for the meeting, you were registered in our system as attendees. Attendees are webinar participants who are simply viewers of the meeting, otherwise an audience member. Your microphone and your webcam are automatically muted as attendees. However, there will be a time during the meeting that we will open it up for public comment. When that time comes, if you wish to participate in public comment, you can raise your virtual hand. There should be an icon on your device, and we will then just press it once, and then we will call on names. When public comment begins, our organizer will call those names in order of the hands going up. When your name is called, you'll be unmuted and be given 3 minutes for public comment. When your 3 minutes is up, we'll go back to muted status and the next name will be called. You can continue to watch the webinar as long as you choose. We'll try to give everyone who wishes to present public comment an opportunity to speak, but note, in the event there are more people wishing to speak than time allots, we may need to limit the speakers or reduce the time allotted per speakers. And the speakers could also be chosen randomly. We haven't had that issue so far, and hopefully we will have enough time for everybody who wishes to speak. So with that, I just wanted to make a couple notes. We do have a 1:30 time certain today and an executive session following our afternoon business. So we will go to item 1, any adjustments to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to emergency business. We don't have any emergency business this morning, but we may take up an item under emergency business in the afternoon. So commissioners, keep an eye out on your email during lunchtime. So we'll move to item 3, public comments. And I'll turn this over to the moderator.
Thank you, Chair Buck. At this time, I would like to open up public comment. If you have registered for the meeting and you would like to speak, please raise your virtual hand at this time. I'm seeing hands going up. I will call your name and I will unmute you. Please do not begin speaking until the timer starts. This will ensure that you get your full 3 minutes. The first person I will call upon is Laurie Trigger. Laurie, I will unmute you and then I will start the timer. 1 moment. You may begin. Laurie, can you hear us? I don't have you muted, but we can't hear you.
Let me try something
Laurie,
else. 1 moment.
We can hear you now.
Okay, great. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Let me reset your timer.
Thank you so much. Apologies for that technical difficulty.
You may begin your public comment.
Good morning. This is Laurie Trigger from District 3. I would like to use the first of my 3 minutes to be together in silence to honor and reflect on the life of George Floyd and the countless other Black lives across our country and right here in Lane County that have been impacted, in too many cases ended by systemic institutional racism and injustice. Thank you. May he rest in peace. If that minute made you uncomfortable in any way, I want you to know it was hard for me too. It was hard because I imagined what it would have felt like to be silent for an additional 7 minutes and 46 seconds, face down in the street with my arms restrained behind me and a police officer's knee on the back of my neck. Then I imagined what it might be like to stand by and watch that happen to another human being for nearly 9 full minutes. The resolution before you later today, in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and Lane County's commitment to putting in the work to achieve racial equity, is a first critical step in codifying an organizational commitment to anti-racist policymaking and to public health equity. I understand resolutions are largely symbolic, to which I say, first off, do not underestimate the power of a symbol. And second, commit to making it more than that. Community needs are shifting and county operations must as well. Lane County government has made some excellent and significant progress toward equity, but there is so much more work to do. The call to act cannot be denied. Your constituents are looking to you for leadership. They want to partner with you to provide perspectives, ideas, support, resources, and more. Today, you have an opportunity to use your privilege, power, and influence to help our communities have difficult conversations and commit to the hard work of making this organization an instrument of justice. I hope you'll choose to be on the right side of history with the unanimous adoption of this historic resolution. I thank you for your time, for your service to all people of Lane County, and for this opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Audrey Stewart. Audrey, I will unmute you and reset the timer, and when you see the timer begin, you may begin speaking. 1 moment. You may begin your public comment.
My name is Audrey Stewart, and I live in District 4, represented by Commissioner Farr. I'm here today to encourage the board to pass additional renter protections in light of the COVID pandemic. As statewide protections are due to expire, this is more important than ever. Like many other young renters, I'm out of work right now, but I'm very lucky to have a financial buffer and know that I can pay rent. Many people around me are not that lucky, and I'm watching friends scramble to find ways to pay rent each month. Delaying payments is a great start, but it will be critical to allow for a grace period so renters are not faced with paying several months' rents at one time. Additionally, renters should not have to worry about rent increases right now, and we need a halt on rent and security deposit increases. I hope the board seriously considers what a vulnerable group renters are and the serious impacts that eviction or late payments can have on a person's credit and future housing options. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Bruce Abel. Mr. Abel, I will unmute you and I will reset the timer. You may begin your public comment when the timer begins. 1 moment.
Good morning, commissioners. This is Bruce Hobble. I hope you're all doing well. I am involved with the Spreading Kindness campaign and House Everyone. We are concerned about unsheltered neighbors during this COVID pandemic and the risk of lousy weather having a significant impact this fall and winter on their health and well-being. The time for action is now. A group of us has been discussing different possible supports that can be implemented in Lane County. This led to a Zoom meeting last week with about 20 faith leaders and city representatives, including Mayor Vinnis, who shared their concerns and considered possible actions a congregation could take to provide additional resources and to provide short-term camping and other supports. We will be sending you a document describing this effort with additional recommendations that might be helpful in developing community and government shared efforts to provide compassionate support. Congregations, the community, the city and county, with unified approaches, can lead to efficient and impactful efforts to reduce homelessness and to develop additional shelter-in-place options. Compassionate action will have an impact Success will create momentum. Momentum will promote change in attitudes and behaviors across the different parts of the community. We look forward to working with you and continuing to be a resource to promote this change in Lane County. That's it.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Gwen Burkhardt. Let me reset the timer and unmute you, and you may begin your public comment shortly. One moment. You may begin your public comment. Gwen Burkhardt, if you can hear us, we cannot hear you. I'm going to pause the timer and move to the next timer. I will come back to Gwen Burkhardt momentarily if we get your mics working. I'm going to move to Corey Northrop. Corey, let me reset the timer. I will unmute you and you may begin your public comment. One moment. You may begin your public comment, Corey.
Thank you for the time. My name is Corey Northrop. I'm a resident of Eugene, District 3, and I just want to say that past and recent responses of the city of Eugene and our institutions have, to me, made it abundantly clear that the voices of our most vulnerable community members are falling on deaf ears, and the power entrusted to these local officials and institutions to protect and serve all of the people of our community have been abused and improperly wielded. The systemic violence and inequality faced by Black, Indigenous, and people of color has shown no signs of relenting after 400 years of oppression. And on the contrary, despite decades of activism and tireless efforts, these heinous injustices have become more blatant, widespread, and accepted, leading to a reality where people are criminalized for having dark skin, mental health illness, or economic hardship. Well, on one hand, I've been heartened to see the vast support that our community members have been showing in the past week. I've been even more disgusted by the actions of the Eugene Police Department to attack peaceful protests with chemical weapons and the lack of city and local officials in taking a stand for all of our discriminated community members. And so I call on every one of you and all of our local officials to use their voice and listen to the voices of those that aren't in a position of power to really push for change that is so dearly needed and begin the process of removing military-style weapons from our police department, which are totally unnecessary. Peaceful protesting is a right to all Americans, and that should not be messed with chemical weapons and extreme force. Thank you for the time, and I appreciate it.
Thank you for your public comment. Our next speaker will be Chris McAlister. I will unmute you, and then let me restart the timer, and you may begin your public comment. One moment. You may begin your public comment.
Just for the record, I cannot see the timer. But that said, my name is Chris McAlister, and I live in Springfield. I wanted to speak first and foremost and say that Breonna Taylor was asleep when she was killed by police. Speaking of police, I was at a rally yesterday that was supposed to be an informed rally to let people know that we support police camps for our local enforcement. And while I was at that rally, police tried to intimidate the people at the rally. So today I'll be formally complaining against Springfield police because of the fact that they tried to silence people who were bringing accountability to our force. If you go and look at some of their pages, the officers are actively engaging in trying to sway public opinion and influence public opinion against these cams. And I'm tired of seeing our people pushed around and denied their truth. As an unhoused advocate and service provider, I have had over 100 calls in the last 3 years where police have not matched the record of what they put when they interact with our unhoused people. Our people are rousted, our people are moved on, and our people are treated like animals by the people who protect and serve. And I support a police force that serves, but I do not support a politically active police force that tries to silence our people through using their weapons and using their vehicles as weapons. When I saw the car with their lights on, not their police lights, but their headlights on, coming out of an alley and just sitting there parked at us, it reminded me of the same view as when a protester ran, or not a protester, a terrorist ran down people at a protest. They were there for posturing. And we need to have people stand for our people, not stand to silence our people. I am currently voluntarily taking care of a household of 4 people who were displaced from when we shut down our shelters because they are so medically fragile they cannot live on the street by themselves. I am paying for someone out of my pocket as a private citizen to make sure that these 3 medically fragile who will not survive an ambulance ride if we take them anywhere outside of our city limits. We need help, and we need our government to rise and support us. Steve Mokryski has been an awesome administrator. Our leadership has, when we have solutions put forward us, made them happen. We need solutions and empowered people to make solutions happen. We have a long haul ahead of us, and I'm very thankful to have the team that we have trying to solve these problems, but we need more, and we need it quickly. If we have partners who have been closed down due to COVID, not open yet, we need our county to help us do some bridge work until those providers open up, until we open up the MLK Commons, until we open up the shelter. We need to utilize our space effectively and efficiently. I was able to personally help 16 out of our 20 people left find some temporary alternative spots. There are a lot more in Springfield who don't have that help, and a lot of people in Lane County who don't have that hope. But I'm working with Sarai Johnson. I'm working with the staff of Lane County to try and fix these solutions. And I implore you guys to give them
Mr. McAlister, your time has ended. Thank you for your public comment.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next speaker will be Timothy Morris. Timothy Morris, please I'm going to unmute you and I will restart the timer. One moment. You may begin speaking. Mr. Morris, can you hear us? We cannot hear you. At this time, I'm going to pause Mr. Morris and I'm going to go back to Gwen Burkhardt and see if we can bring her on. One moment. Gwen, can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to pause Gwen one last time, and I'm going to, I think we have one more speaker. It is, but I can't see his hand raised, but I know he's there. Maybe it looks like he dropped off. Oh, Doug Carmine. I will unmute you, and you may begin your public comment when I reset the timer. One moment. Can you hear us, Mr. Carmine?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes. You may begin your public comment.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone for allowing me to make this comment. I'm the coordinator for the Spreading Kindness campaign, and Bruce spoke about our meeting on Friday, and we are very pleased with the response of the religious community to consider various options to support unsheltered and unhoused people in our community. And as Bruce said, that plan will be made available to you soon. What I want to go ahead and talk about is that we're headed even into a more difficult time, and not just for the unhoused, but as the rent moratorium ends and as we find many people not being able to go back to work, there'll be increasing stress and negativity. So the campaign has created a poster with our campaign logo and that of the NAACP and Peace Health. And the idea is to make prominent that hardship need not translate into negativity and unkindness. Brittany has approved adding the chamber logo. And so you will be able to see that in the document that I submitted. It actually has the Lane County logo on it. We will not distribute this, obviously, because the county is not approved, but we did want to show you what the poster would look like with the county logo. We're also in conversation with 4J District and the City of Eugene about adding their logos and other ways to make this message prominent around the community. Eric Richardson is supporting the poster because it is a statement about our need to confront racism by following Dr. King's recommendation that only love can overcome hate. The campaign is forcefully requesting that the county's logo be added to the poster and that it be distributed widely within government and government programs. We will be distributing the poster throughout the county and adding other logos as organizations decide to join in. As times get even more difficult, we must remind ourselves and our co-workers and those we serve that hardship can be better endured with kindness to benefit ourselves and those we work with and those we serve. Thank you for allowing me to make this comment.
Thank you for your public comment. I see a couple more people have joined. I apologize if I pronounce your name wrong. Reidel Williams, you will be our next speaker. I will unmute you and reset the timer. One moment. You may begin your public comment.
Good morning. Thank you for your attention. I'd like to just call on all commissioners here this morning to please add their voices to the growing chorus in our community, calling for defunding of all police, the closure of the jail, and diverting those funds to provide for community support and community-based solutions that are not founded on institutional racism. So, all right, that's what I'm doing this morning. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. I will return one more time to Gwen Burkhardt to see if we can get you on. I'm going to unmute you. Gwen, I do show that you're self-muted now. If you can unmute yourself, that would help.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yes, let me reset the timer and you may begin your public comment. One moment.
Thank you.
Thank you. You may begin your public comment.
I'm speaking to you today to stress the need for urgency in responding to the impact of the COVID-19 crisis and the worsening economy. As a renter and senior living in limited income, I'm one of the rapidly growing numbers of vulnerable members of our community.
You too, exclamation point.
Yes. You are already aware of the statistics on relative income, housing shortages, cost of living burdens, unemployment, etc. But what can easily be lost is the recognition that behind those numbers are real people. People who are struggling to survive month to month, day to day. People who are elderly, people with disabilities, families, single parents, people living on the streets because they simply don't have a home. While the current measures, the eviction moratorium and financial assistance are welcome, they are temporary and not enough. Even the additional funds recently approved by the state will not be enough. Many people are accumulating and will accumulate substantial rent arrears, often on top of pre-existing debt. That is unsustainable and will cause very real difficulties when the moratorium on evictions notices is lifted. Jobs and income will not magically appear or reappear to cover the shortfall. Renters must continue to get assistance and protections to avoid being left with unsustainable debt when restrictions are lifted, or worse, lose their homes altogether. I have seen and support the recommendations being put forward by the Springfield Eugene Tenants Association. Time is of the essence. We need to continue to see direct and prompt action. Deadlines are coming, and we need to have some movement before the moratorium is lifted. Thank you. I have time. One other thing I wanted to add real quickly. Let's not forget landlord support. This is particularly, separate from the CEDA recommendations, but landlords, especially small landlords, whose tenants are unable to pay their rent, I think also need some assistance in maybe deferring mortgage payments and things like that. And I just want to throw that in there because let's not forget that there are other people besides tenants that are being affected by this. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. We do have possibly two more. At this time, I would like to let Eva Cronin know that it is her turn to speak. Let me unmute you. Eva, it looks like you are, there you go. I'm going to reset the, yes, let me reset the timer and I will, you can begin your public comment now.
Thank you. I'll be really glad when we can all be in the same room because the technological things are very frustrating. My name is Eva Cronin, and I thank you for the opportunity to speak with you again. I spoke with you last week. Since last week, I learned of 2 more Head Start families that are at risk of losing their housing when the eviction moratorium is lifted. One involves a dad that was laid off a month ago, and the employer has yet to file the necessary paperwork for him to apply for unemployment. They have had to apply for TANF, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, and SNAP, Food Stamp Benefits, 2 benefits they were not relying on previously. They are still waiting for their stimulus check. Without an extension or another avenue for rental assistance, this family will lose their housing. The other family cannot pay rent because of lost wages due to COVID and is still waiting for unemployment. They sought rental assistance but don't qualify because of certain rules. This family is falling through the cracks. These are just 2 of the many experiences I hear about in my work. We must prioritize providing rent relief to avoid families with children from becoming homeless. I ask you to craft legislation that extends the rights of renters who, through no fault of their own, do not have the funds to cover their rent and are simply surviving. I ask that the gaps created by state and federal rules be filled. Low-income families struggle on a regular basis to keep up with the cost of living and the cost of housing. The COVID pandemic is hurting these families the most, and time is running out. I am very much interested in hearing that this board will take up the task of passing ordinances protecting renters, thereby averting a needless catastrophe. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your public comment. I would like to try to return to Timothy Morris one more time to see if we can get his audio working. Mr. Morris, I will unmute you and can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Let me
Hooray.
reset the timer and you may begin your public comment. Please begin.
Good morning, commissioners and staff. My name is Tim Morris, and I am the board president of the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association. I do want to first take a moment to thank all of the speakers and hard workers for those involved in racial justice. And I wish I had 10 or 20 minutes to be able to add my voice to their work as well. But I'm here to speak about protections of renters and to talk about the policy recommendations of the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association. As you've heard from across the last several weeks, there have been many renter and rental advocates whose situations that they face are incredibly dire. And I'm choosing to spend my 3 minutes here to not really reiterate a lot of the 5 policy recommendations from CETA, but to explain my own situation and to change what percentage numbers and what the countless figures on our charts look like into a real personal experience, especially as many of you know me personally. Back in March, I was furloughed from my job due to COVID-19. I was let go May 19th from my job because my position had been cut. I have applied for unemployment the moment that I had been furloughed, and unfortunately, due to the state, I have yet to receive a single unemployment payment. My job search has been incredibly difficult due to COVID-19 and the economic impact there. My property management company has made it abundantly clear that the moment that the eviction moratorium ends, I will be expected to begin payments to which I have not received any income within the last 3 months. I will be facing homelessness very soon if action is not taken. And I lie awake in at night wondering if I should sell my car for extra income, or if that might be my new home for a short time being. So I'm sharing my story with you because it is a very common story that we're hearing across our nation, across our state, and right here in Lane County. And we continue to hear this story time and time again from renters who are reaching out to CETA, who are asking for what small amount of resources that they can get. And we can only give so many because there are so many available. I really urge the County Commission to take action and to implement the 5 policy recommendations to be able to support renters and their economic struggle that we were finding ourselves in. It's not that we are not able to access resources. We have exhausted the resources and we are running out of time. So thank you so much for your work, and thank you for taking our policy recommendations seriously.
Thank you for your public comment. At this time, I do not see any additional hands raised to speak. I do see a few people still on there, so if you would like to give public comment, please raise your hand now. I do not see anybody else raising their hand, so Chair Buck, I believe that is the end of our public comment. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for your public comment. We will move on to Commissioner's response and remonstrance. Does anybody wish to speak? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. Great testimony this morning on a variety of subjects that are on the front of each one of our minds. I'm certain of that. Many of which, several of which we'll be talking about as the day progresses. I wrote down a couple of things that really caught my attention. One is a quote by Chris McAlister. Chris, thanks for being here again this morning. I support a police force that serves, but not one that engages in political activity. Then Gwen Burkhardt said something that we've been talking about that I say quite often: behind the numbers are real people. Each time that we are talking about numbers and talking about statistics, always remembering that there's a set of eyes behind each number. There's a human being behind each number. Sometimes it's the kid, sometimes it's somebody who's vulnerable, sometimes it's somebody who is harsh and mean. But every time we talk about numbers, there are real people behind the numbers. And Doug Carmine said something that I've heard him say a number of times before. I've heard Bruce Hobble say the same thing. Bruce Abel, excuse me, said the same thing. Hardship can be endured kindness. So thank you for your testimony.
Any other comments? Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to respond to the public comments. First and foremost, I'd like to thank Laurie Trigger for her comments in support of the Black Lives Matter resolution. I thought that was very powerful. I appreciate her leadership on the county's human rights board, and I really appreciate it. Secondly, Ms. The commenters, all the commenters on renters issues, Mr. Morris, that was very powerful, your story. Ms. Burkhardt as well. Isaac Rubin wrote me, and I asked him if I could read part of his email. I moved to Eugene last August after a week in the hospital. It took me down to 95 pounds. After a couple of months of recovery and going through all my savings, I started working at the downtown athletic club, helping to set up events. Shortly after, got a promotion to work in the restaurant and bar, also picking up a second job at the Hilltop Bar and Grill. When COVID hit, I lost both those jobs, and now late on this month's rent, I was denied unemployment for reasons I can't clarify. Still waiting to hear if I qualify for rental assistance through the state. Please consider there are countless people in my position struggling just like me to find a safe job. For my chronic illness makes working in the restaurant industry dangerous at this time. Pretty powerful. I'm glad he agreed to have me read that. And Doug Carmine, thank you so much for suggesting that Lane County add its logo to your kindness advocacy. I'm in favor of doing that, and thanks for bringing it to our attention. And I'd finally like to say that I really appreciate all of the public commenters this morning. Thank you so much.
Any other comments or remonstrance? All right, I'll just add that I appreciate, there's a lot of really meaty issues we're dealing with right now. I heard about the meeting the Spreading Kindness folks had about housing opportunities and how well received and impactful it was. So I appreciate that very much. We need everybody's ideas and information and minds on how to find solutions for housing, and that's how you do it. So thank you for doing that. I have heard multiple personal stories like Mr. Morris shared with us today, where they still have not received any unemployment and they're at their end of their rope. And we cannot let those people slip through. I absolutely feel like we need to do something more. And we are having conversations about some of those items that Cita brought up here in a little bit today at our meeting. So I look forward to that particular conversation. I also stand with the Black Lives Matter movement and look forward to having that resolution conversation here today as well. The two mayors and myself did have a press conference on Friday afternoon regarding this. The city has it on their Facebook page and the county does as well. I mentioned our resolution that we'll be talking about today with action items included, because I knew that it was important for our board to ensure that we didn't just have a resolution, but that we had some meaningful items to talk about and to follow up on in that resolution. Commissioner Burney.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to say on a personal level that I'm so overwhelmed with the moment, with its impacts on our friends, our families, our children, that really I don't have anything profound to say other than an affinity and solidarity really with all the ways in which all of us, as best we can, individually and collectively, are organizing to support each other. Within that context, let me just say that last night, for example, I was at and spoke to a rally that one of the presenters mentioned. It was convened by many groups, including Lane County Black Lives Matter, including the Springfield Safer Area for Equity and Respect. I believe that's what the acronym stands for. And it was a very large crowd, and it was a peaceful crowd, and it was a self-policing crowd. And we were demonstrating, supporting the city of Springfield, because all of this plays itself out in different ways in our different communities. The city of Springfield was considering dropping body cameras for law enforcement officers as part of a response at looking at COVID-19 cuts. And I would like to report to everyone that as a result of many things, and I think that protest was one of them, the City of Springfield Budget Committee kept completely whole the body cameras for police officers in the budget that they referred to the city. So we feel good about that, and there will be testimony to the city next week. And I think this indirectly relates to some of the things that have been discussed. I think in this pandemic, it reminds me of a Langston Hughes poem, which I'm going to read because it's unbelievable. This is 70 years ago. And this is speaking about Black Harlem, and I think it is incredibly prescient. A dream deferred. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet?
I want you to be able to hear the county commissioners. But
anybody else as well? Commissioner Burney is speaking.
Oh, well, okay. That's the end of the poem. Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? The coronavirus has killed over 100,000 of us in just a few short. I was just told I was unmuted. Am I unmuted now? Well, now,
yes.
Hey, now we all know what I'm in government, and Big Brother just muted me. I don't know what to do at this point. I was in the middle of reading a poem and making a quick statement. I can't read it. Can anyone read what Heather is putting there?
I think she says she's muted somehow or another. Joe, I would finish your poem and your statement.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Joe, I would like to give you the time to redo your whole statement.
That's very kind of you. I'm rather than the beginning statement, let me just start here. A poem by Langston Hughes, 70 years ago. Black Harlem, incredibly prescient to all of us today. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? And what I was going to say, in solidarity with everyone that's spoken about various ways this is manifesting itself, that right now the coronavirus in a short few months has killed over 100,000 Americans. Yet poverty alone is responsible for over 300,000 deaths annually in this country, a travesty in its own right. I think we are grappling with, and we will later in the agenda, a notion, almost an economy, that's organized around the notion that people exist to serve the economy. And we need to awaken to the fact that the economy exists to serve the needs of people. All people, not just the small percentage. The economy has been contrived to serve very well. I think we're all in this with you, and we are grappling as you are, and we are seeking resources from places to respond to all these needs. We do not have everything within this county, and I can't thank everyone enough for their testimony. And I think I just ended the longest response in history because of this muting, and I apologize for that.
So sorry for the technical difficulties. You know, platforms like this can be challenging. Any final comments or remonstrance? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the consent calendar. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Moved by Commissioner Burney, second by Commissioner Sorensen. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Anybody opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. So we will move on to item 6A, our COVID-19 update. We have Mr. Mokrzycki and Ms. Gaffney, our EOC Incident Commander.
Just a brief introduction before Karen gets started. Of course, you'll hear a public health update from Karen Gaffney, our Director of Health and Human Services and Incident Commander for our Community Public Health Response. We also have Sarai Johnson, who is our Housing and Shelter Strategist, a joint position between Lane County and the City of Eugene, jointly funded between our organizations. And I wanted to just take a brief moment because Karen will segue right to Sarai to introduce all of you. I know you heard Sarai present during the budget process, but just to, for the board and for the public who's listening in, to introduce Sarai and her position. This was our Housing and Shelter Strategist position is intentionally funded both by the City of Eugene and Lane County, reports to the County Administrator in Lane County and the City Manager in Eugene, intentionally to have a high level of reporting and influence. And it's been always intended that this position be a catalytic leader on housing and shelter, a barrier buster and a solutions creator, someone who works collaboratively to disrupt many of our systems and respectfully challenges the status quo. This position, and Sarai in this position, is our point person implementing the what is often referred to as the TAC report, which more substantively means our housing and shelter strategies that have been committed to both by Lane County and the City of Eugene. And Sarai is working actively with our bureaucracies in the City of Eugene and in Lane County, as well as our nonprofit service providers, the faith community, and other advocates to identify systemic solutions to solve homelessness. So I just wanted to offer that brief introduction of Sarai and her role. We're really excited to have her as part of our joint team in implementing all these efforts. And I'll turn it over to Karen for an update on COVID-19.
Thank you, Chair Buck, Commissioners. I am going to do my very best to be very brief this morning because I know you have a full morning of really important things to talk about. And I just want to appreciate Commissioner Burney's poem. I think Langston Hughes is worth listening to twice. So I'm glad that we got to hear that a second time. Overall, I'll start with our numbers where I usually start. As of this morning, we have had 81 people who have tested positive in Lane County for the coronavirus. And of those people, 4 are what we would consider currently active cases. We have no one in the hospital as of this morning, and those 4 people are recovering at home. Yesterday, we passed the 14,000 number for testing in our community with 14,100 negative tests to date. And last week, we had 2 days where we exceeded 425 tests in a day. So as you know from our regular reports, our goal is to really get up to 500 tests a day, and our numbers continue to grow. And I'm hopeful that very soon I'll be able to report to you that we have met that threshold. So that's testing in the community, and most of that is driven through providers and our state public health lab and the private labs. In addition to that work that's really targeted at people who think they might have COVID-19,
Public health does its own testing effort to really strategically do testing amongst asymptomatic people to determine where else we might have cases, particularly in vulnerable populations. And I know we've talked about that several times in this report. Just to give you an update on where we are right now, as of last week, we had completed 1,096 tests in that program. 693 of those were in the long-term care facilities. And please know that a lot of those long-term care facilities are doing their own testing. So the numbers I'm reporting are just the ones that public health staff have gone out, collected samples, and worked with the lab to get those processed. This week, we have 4 long-term care facilities and 320 people. 4 of our long-term care facilities have recurrent testing with us. And we continue to expand that program each week. Again, I want to acknowledge Dr. Guzman, who has done an amazing job spearheading that effort with our long-term care facilities, our homeless shelters and service providers, and our Latinx population, which is where we've focused in our testing efforts. So this coming week, we have testing scheduled at a number of the rest stops and Opportunity Village, and targeted Latinx testing in Eugene, Springfield, and then we'll be dipping down into Mapleton and hopefully Oak Ridge in the next week or two. So really expanding that effort countywide. Again, our testing and then the follow-up of case investigation and contact tracing is really the key to continuing to contain the spread of disease in our community. As of this morning, we have a rate per 1,000 of 21.3 cases in Lane County, which compares with a statewide average of 109.1 cases per 1,000. So our rate continues to be significantly lower than the state average, and certainly lower than our neighbors to the north and south that are higher than us as well. This week, we expect to see from the governor's office guidance for schools. I know our K-12 system has been eagerly awaiting that guidance about what reopening will look like for them. So we have a plan for a series of meetings with our school partners to help once that guidance drops. And we continue to work closely with the University of Oregon on higher ed plans as well. And then as we start to shift the conversation towards recovery, I would also, I'm not going to give you an update about rental assistance. I know you have an agenda item specifically on that, but that did open last week, and our energy assistance program has opened this week. And we are submitting, have submitted and hope to hear this week on round 2 funding from Business Oregon, which I think we talked last week about our hope to be able to combine that with the round 1 funding and really increase our level of supports possible to businesses in the community. So Austin will keep you posted when we hear about that work. So I think there, just to preserve time for questions, I'm going to shift our focus a little bit. As you know from our discussion last week and weeks prior, we're shifting we're transitioning our respite centers and shelters to a focus on our ongoing recovery work in the community, and particularly that recovery work related to housing and homelessness strategies. As Steve said in his introduction, Sarai Johnson is leading that work for us. So I'm going to shift it over to Sarai to give an update there, and then I'm going to hang out and be able to answer any questions the board might have. Sarai?
Thank you, Karen. Good morning, Chair Buck, commissioners. Thank you so much for having me here today. Yeah, as Karen said, we have demobilized the emergency respite shelters that were operating from March until just last Friday, June 5th. The timing of that coincided with Lane County entering into phase 2, which has lots of different implications, partly around being able to open up some smaller events at the fairgrounds where these sites were located. One of the sites was located, and also just some conditions at the Memorial Building in Springfield. It's under contract to sell, and some other kind of time contingent things. So this sort of led to the closure of those programs and entering into a, I'll call it a holding pattern for the summer as we prepare for fall and winter. As you might also know, I believe in some of the reports, it is stated that we did lose about half of the shelter beds that were online in March. From dusk to dawn and from the Eugene mission. So about 248 beds, 250-ish are no longer available in the system. And we had hoped that they would come back online to coincide with the closure of the respite shelters, but that unfortunately is not the case due to continuing social distancing needs. So we anticipate that gap to continue and have been working really closely with both the City of Eugene and City of Springfield to identify locations where people can legally sleep at night in most likely car camping or sort of tent camping, similar to the designated temporary shelter sites that the City of Eugene set up as part of their emergency response for COVID-19. So we are working actively with a group of representatives from both municipalities and also from Lane County to see where people might go and see that as a deeply urgent need. We were able to not only successfully demobilize the emergency respite shelters, but also clear the encampment that was inside the fairgrounds on Friday as well. Some people from Human Services Division, emergency manager, patients, and myself were able to go work with the campers at the fairground to provide them with resources and support that they needed to move to their next location. Our goal was to do that peacefully and supportively and gently so that people were set up as well as possible kind of moving into their next place. It was, I would say, a success. We did have a lot of support from the people in the tent sites, and what we heard from people was that they were really grateful to have had a place to be for a period of time. If I were to share some of the key learnings that I've picked up during the COVID-19 emergency response, one of the most important ones is just how significant it is for people to be allowed to sleep somewhere at night without fear of being swept or harassed by those who might not like seeing people sleep. COVID-19 has truly thrust this issue of homelessness, and especially unsheltered homelessness in our communities, into the public eye in a way that it maybe hasn't been quite as visible for some time. I would like to just note that all of the people here primarily have been here for a while. So it's not necessarily new people coming in and suddenly setting up camp in Eugene and Springfield, but rather people who always live here, needing to position themselves closer to the very few resources that have been available to them during the stay-at-home executive order. So this is a challenge in a lot of different ways, but up until the 5th of June, Eugene Police Department was holding off on sweeps, as CDC guidance has indicated that leaving encampments in place and helping them be safe is ideal. So as we move into the next piece of work, what we're looking to do, or at least what I hope that we can do, is locate more places that people will be able to sleep at night, whether that's in the navigation center that we're working on. Over time, that will be the case. In the meantime, I'm interested in seeing how much non-congregate shelter we might be able to set up, again, in light of what we've learned from COVID-19, that options like individual tents or Conestoga huts or hotel rooms are a better option to keep especially vulnerable people safer during the pandemic. So I was really heartened by the faith communities meeting with the mayor that Mr. Carmine and Mr. Hobble mentioned. It sounds like there are some congregations in the community that are very interested in helping out with sites. We also discussed that one of the barriers in the past has been that churches have often been expected to do the management of the sites and the kind of interfacing with the people who live there. But they also indicated that with some case management support, it would be easier for them to say yes to a placement. And also that they might be interested in supporting case management services financially. So we are working with a local 501c3 to try to set up a place for congregations and for other people in the community who are interested in seeing this kind of thing happen to donate. And as we are talking so much about shelter, I also want to make sure that it's clear that shelter is not the place we want to stop for people. We want to create as much housing, permanent housing, as we possibly can so that people have a safe place to call home. In the meantime, keeping people safe with shelter is a top priority, especially as we head into a fall and winter that will be complicated by the presence of a virus. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have Commissioner Sorensen and then Commissioner Farr.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation. In preparation for today's meeting, I sent Ms. Gaffney several questions, and I was hoping to kind of zero in on a couple of them. First one was, do we, meaning public health and the county blueprint, have a timeline for increasing the testing? It sounds like we have not averaged 500 tests per day because we had a high recently. You mentioned a 425 tests, which is means that any given 7-day average is going to fall well below 425. Can you give us some detail on the rolling average or the number of tests within that have really gone up recently? Are we basically averaging 400 a day, or what is the actual number of tests we've done in this period where you've tried to increase the testing?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, might direct you to the Lane County website where we post our testing status on our local data tab. You and anyone in the community is welcome to look at that. We're being clear, we want to be really transparent about where we're at. So you can look at what our testing results are. In terms of timeline, I would say we've been clear since we issued the blueprint that this was our goal to move forward to as quickly as possible. So we continue to work with resources in the community to increase their capacity, and you'll have an opportunity this afternoon to hear just a little bit more about some work that the University of Oregon is doing. So we expect that we'll get to 500 tests a day with the existing capacity that we have in the community. And then we will continue to build on that as we get more capacity.
And one of my other questions I sent you on Saturday was, does public health in the county's blueprint have a goal of meeting federal standards for all patients and staff and in nursing homes? And I would also add to that, in light of the Lincoln County fish processing news, congregate work settings and congregate locations. Do we have a goal of meeting those federal standards? And with respect to those federal standards, are we ahead, behind, or way behind of those federal standards?
I think the federal standards you're referencing is the guidance to nursing homes and long-term care facilities that they should test all of their residents and staff. So I think that that's a partnership effort. So there's not, I guess I wouldn't think of it as a standard, as a requirement per se, but we absolutely are partnering with our long-term care facilities. As I've told you in past meetings, we are in contact with each and every one of them. Some are arranging their own testing, which is fantastic. Some others have asked us to come in and support them with that testing, and we have been continuing to do that. For my perspective, we're focused very much on finding where the reservoirs of disease are. And we have been conscientious with the long-term care facilities. And I will tell you, they have been doing a fantastic job of really limiting exposure in those settings. And we have not had major outbreaks there, which is great. I know other communities have confronted that. So we continue to work with them closely and carefully as we move through.
With respect to the nursing homes, is the nursing home dated? You said some, we're working with some. I'm just curious whether those facilities are meeting that federal standard, and if they're not, is that information available on our website so that the public knows which facilities are meeting that standard and which facilities are not meeting that standard?
No, we do not list that on our website. I think if people are concerned about a particular facility, they absolutely should call and inquire with that facility of what they are doing in terms of their testing standards. Our staff in public health absolutely do keep in contact with them, but we're not posting that on our website. Those facilities are regulated through DHS, and they have particular requirements that they post through their website. I'm not certain if this is included, but for instance, DHS has requirements if there is a case in a long-term care facility, that needs to be posted on the website, and outbreaks. So DHS may have some posting that they do with those facilities since they are the licensing agent there. I haven't looked at that website recently to know for sure.
Are you
in
also,
terms of,
yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to answer your question about large employers and particularly your reference to the outbreak in Lincoln County in their seafood packing facilities. I think we've seen nationally that food packing facilities are a significant area of risk. It's been challenging in those sites to maintain distancing requirements, and I know our public health officer has been on several calls with the health officer in Lincoln County to talk about that. And we have done planning in our community to make sure we're supporting those large employers. For instance, we've been talking recently about chicken processing and some other food processing operations that we do have in Lane County, and absolutely offering testing and doing surveillance work with them and their employees. So we are a resource there, and that is absolutely a situation where if there were to be an outbreak, that information, the state has agreed and notified employers that that would be released to the public if that happens. So hopefully we will not face that. It has been a significant issue in Lincoln County for sure.
Yeah, and I guess that leads to the third of my three questions, and that was the details in our EOC report on the and reporting it to the public via the website for the statistics on the daily statistics on where the tests were performed, including like at an employment site, or a nursing home, or a jail, and the demographics of those tested. In other words, there's been reference to the Latinx community, but what percentage of those 425 tests that were done recently on that particular day when we achieved 425, are those people all in a long-term care facility? Are they all Latinx? Are they some of each? In other words, are we getting data for the public to understand that we're just not able to test, we just have not got the resources to test all of these people, so we're sampling them, but we're not releasing that to the public to let them know, both on the positive side, hey, we tested 425 people, that's good. On the bad side, that means only 10 were Latinx, only 15 were in a nursing home, only 40 were in a jail, etc. Could you give us that kind of confidence that where the test has occurred and the demographics of the testing is something so that the public can see that we're trying to do this in an intelligent fashion? Or if we just don't have the resources and we're doing the best we can, this is what we have. No, we haven't tested the chicken plants, and we've only tested 20 to 30% of the Latinx community. And that's sort of the information. Oh, and finally, I know there's a lot of controversy. The WHO just put out a thing saying that asymptomatic people aren't spreading the disease, where CDC said 40% of the spread is from asymptomatic people. I think that it would be helpful for the public to know who we're testing in terms of the asymptomatic and symptomatic results. Could you give us some insight on whether we could report those numbers, if they are reported, if we keep track of it, and if those data are available to the public?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, there are a lot of questions bundled up in that. So I'll start with the question you started with, which I did answer in email to you over the weekend, related to whether or not the specific organizations, employers, entities where our testing program is going on site, whether we list that on our website or whether we would release that publicly. And I will say at this point, our work really has requires a significant amount of trust from the community to be willing to engage with us and partner with us in this work. And we have chosen not to publicly identify each and every organization unless there's a public health reason to do that. So for instance, if we have an outbreak somewhere and it's important for us to be able to communicate that to the public, we absolutely would release that. However, there is still some significant sensitivity in the community, and we want to encourage entities to work with us. So we are not publicizing the particular businesses or facilities on our website, just allowing them to make that choice if they want to publicize that or not.
Or the type of facility, the type, you're not putting out the type of facility, even though I could draw a distinction between the type of facility, a jail as opposed to a or prison as opposed to a meat packing plant, as opposed to a specific jail like the Florence jail or the Cottage Grove jail, as opposed to a specific brand name chicken processing plant. You're not only not disclosing the name of the facility and identifying the facility, but you're also not identifying the type of facility, correct?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, I would say that's not necessarily true. I believe I have reported weekly to you in public session the answers to those questions consistently. We don't necessarily have it posted somewhere on our website, but I'm actually just skimming through right now our weekly surveillance summary because I think sometimes it's mentioned in there. It's a report that our EPIs are preparing now that can, if that isn't there, I have no problem with talking about the types of facilities we're testing in. I'm actually really proud of that work. And it would be exactly reflective of what I have been sharing with you in public session since the beginning of the outbreak.
I think that would be helpful to the public to let them know, yes, we are testing, these facilities. We don't want to give up the names of them, but we want to also let people know that we are doing the testing. Obviously, in the case of Lincoln County, they were reporting very favorable numbers to the governor, to the Oregon Health Authority, and then all of a sudden they get this big outbreak. And it's that for those reasons that I am pressing for this openness, as open as public health law and policy that you're following, as open as that will allow. Because I think if we do get a big outbreak, there's going to be questions, as there will be now in Lincoln County. Why are we opening up when we have this big outbreak? And they go from one of the best counties in the state to one of the worst just because of this large outbreak in their community. Thank you.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck, and thank you, Commissioner Sorensen, for those deep probing questions. Ms. Gaffney, thank you for reminding us that you do answer most of those questions quite frequently, and that we can refer to the website for the public can refer to our very comprehensive and up-to-date website for answers to questions at all times. I was looking at it as Commissioner Sorensen was asking the questions, and I really am appreciative of the work that goes into keeping that website updated. Thank you. I'm going to step away from you, Ms. Gaffney. I have a lot of questions for you, but none of them that need to take up the time of the Board of County Commissioners right now. I'm going to talk to you, sir. Are you still there?
Yes, I am.
It was good to see you on Friday. I spent much of my morning with you on June 5th, the day before June 6th. We were at the Expo Center. We were talking to people as they were leaving, and we're talking to the folks who were where they were headed when they were headed to different places. I wanted to thank you for being there in person. You were there, you were on the ground, and I didn't have much chance to talk to you personally because you were talking to everybody else instead of me. I thought that was great. Thank you.
Thank you for being there.
And you know, you said something that was really, that I found to be absolutely the truth. As people were leaving, I was curious what was the attitude of the folks that were leaving. So I talked to quite a number of I think there were about 40 people that spent the night there on Thursday who were packing up and leaving early on Friday morning. And a number of them said that they were exactly what you said. They were grateful having had a safe and warm place to sleep and stay, where they had food and medical attention, albeit for a relatively short period of time. And there was one man who was talking to Roxanne from St. Vincent de Paul, and he was saying, he was just thanking her, saying that I came in here, I was sick, I'm leaving here, I'm healthy, I'm fed, I'm warm, I've had medical attention. But then he also said, I hope I can keep that. And that really is my next point, Sarai, and this is something that I know that you are working on. Where do people go now? As throughout the week on leading up to June 6th, the day after June 5th, I was asking the question quite frequently. Mr. Moker, I see you and I spent quite a bit of time talking about this on Friday morning also. Where are people going beyond this point? And we're trying very, very hard, Sarai, and I know that you are working on it as it turns out, day and night. But can you talk about how is the city of Eugene doing? Now, many of the places that we're looking to set up camps potentially are going to be inside the city limits of Eugene and or inside the city limits of Springfield. Can you talk about your work with the city of Eugene just a little bit?
Yeah, the city of Eugene has kind of a dual way of moving forward. So when they have plans to demobilize their designated temporary shelter sites on June 17th, and before that date are working to locate sites where the people who remain in those shelters can go. So they have, I believe, 3 different sites identified for that purpose. And so the folks that are still staying in their designated temporary shelter sites will be placed elsewhere in small pods, similar to rest stops, but smaller. So they're working within the ordinance of up to 6 campers on a site. That process is really just for the people in their shelter sites at this point. So what we're also doing is working with Christy Hammett, the assistant city manager, and Brooke Freed, who works in the CMO, and also the others who are doing homelessness services. So Peter Chabon is around in those 2, working on identifying additional sites where people can go, where we could set up to 6 tents within the Eugene city limits. There are also a few sites on the list. I think we have 16 or 17 left on the list that are just outside the urban growth boundary, which would potentially provide a little bit of flexibility with how we would set those up. So we have people assigned to follow up on each of the locations that are still on that list. That list does also not include all of the potential county-owned properties and all of the city-owned properties, both between Eugene and Springfield, that could be potentially available. So I have talked with Dan Hurley in Public Works quite a bit about a few county road fund sites that are in Eugene. So we'll be looking at those. I'm gonna, I believe, look at those with Chris McAlister today, later this afternoon, to kind of see what these be, can we do something here? In Springfield, their ordinances are a bit different. And so we have a kind of a different constraint to work within. But I am really, truly extremely happy that the city of Springfield is at the table and participating in this conversation and helping to move that forward. So yeah, that's kind of where we stand with Eugene at this moment.
Thank you, Sarai. And that's kind of a recap of what you and I spoke of on Friday. And while it is encouraging, it's not quite satisfactory yet because we haven't identified the sites. And really, my vision, my personal vision, which nobody needs to share this with me, is that we do have several sites located geographically dispersed throughout the city of Eugene and Springfield where smaller numbers of people can stay, so that if someone is camping on public property in an unsanctioned spot, the police departments or whomever may be contacting can say, you cannot sleep here, but here's where you can sleep. You said that people, let's see, I'm looking for your exact quote on this. People want a place to sleep. I guess that's easy to remember, isn't it? People want a place to sleep. And I think we all know that. And that is the kind of comfort that people really need to have when they're being moved from a whether it's a congregate camping site or from a unsanctioned camping site. So Sarai, thank you. You've done a superb job so far. I know that you and Mr. Mulcahy and Lane County staff work together on a regular basis. I'm anxious to see the city of Eugene coordinating their efforts, perhaps a little bit more than they have been with you and your office in the county, in making certain that we do find these sites as soon as possible and get people into safe sleeping places where they are themselves safe from the spread of the virus, and also keeping other folks safe from the spread of the virus. So Sarai, thanks very much for all the work that you're putting into that. One last thing that I'd like to mention to you, Mr. Mulcahy, and to you, Ms. Gaffney. I've been speaking with the sheriff, and Commissioner Sorensen talked about inmate populations. How are we testing inmate populations? And I was curious. The sheriff's given me some good information regarding what is happening inside of the Lane County Jail and what is happening with transfers in and out of the jail, which do happen occasionally, very rarely at this point in time, but sometimes people get moved in, moved out for whatever reason it may be. So I've asked the sheriff if he and perhaps Captain Riley could put together a report back, just a note to us, to the Board of County Commissioners, to reassure, or not to reassure, but to describe the protocol that exists within the Lane County Jail regarding safety from infection for the jail staff and for inmates, which are, by definition, inmates are a very vulnerable community. They rely on the state, the state being the government, not the state of Oregon, for everything, basically, for their bed, their food, their medication, everything. They are vulnerable populations in that respect. So I've asked the sheriff if he would provide a short report to us, ask what is the protocol and how is testing, et cetera, happening inside the jail. And he has agreed to do so, Mr. Mulcahy. So I'm not asking you for that as an assignment, but maybe we can mention this at the end of the meeting today, that report will be coming back to us. So thank you very much, Sarai. Once again, I'm really excited to see your work because it seems that every week you're grabbing more and more of the items that we need and bringing them under your umbrella. Thank you, Sarai. Been excited about your work for a long time and more excited each time you and I talk.
Chair Buck,
so much,
could I just briefly, Commissioner Farr, I wanted to appreciate you bringing up the jail piece and want to take a moment to really publicly give a shout out to our sheriff and Captain Riley for the work that they've done from the very beginning of the epidemic to make sure that they have protocols in place at the jail. Early on where there was very limited testing available, they put protocols into place, and now as testing is more widely available, we've shifted those and implemented testing protocols for people over there. And I think it just really speaks terrifically of their commitment to helping make sure that we keep people in our care safe, and they've been great partners of public health.
Thank you, Ms. Gaffney. That is essentially what the sheriff has told me, and I'm looking forward to seeing that in a report to the board so that we can at least understand the protocol is in place and be at a certain level confident that we are taking care of that vulnerable population inside the jail.
Commissioner Burney and Commissioner, I am getting my screen freezes and I'm getting muted by it says muted by the organizer on it, although I know that's not our staff. So if any of you see me not respond when my moment is supposed to come back to keep the meeting going, I'm going to just give fair warning, Commissioner Burney, that you'll want to take over to keep the meeting moving if for some reason that continues to happen for me.
That's plan B. And plan C is when I get muted off. Well, we'll see what happens. Forgive my confusion.
I am available.
We want someone with experience. Just kidding. Are we on item 6A?
No, we're on item 6A. Yeah, we should wrap this up maybe with your comments, and then we'll move to item 6B next.
Okay, thank you. First off, I don't know about anyone else, but every evening when I watch the national news and I see a map of the United States and I see the states where the COVID virus is increasing and getting hotter and color-coded those that are not, Oregon always looks pretty good. like we're in, relative to the rest of the country, great shape. And I know Lane County, because I've seen the statistics relative to the rest of Oregon, is in good shape. I don't pretend to be an expert on this, but Karen and Pat and everyone, you must be doing something right. So thank you very much. Really, thank you very much. As a high risk,
that was not Pat Farr you were talking about, by the way.
Did I say Pat?
No, you're talking about Dr. Ludke. I want to make people to make sure you're not thanking me.
Yes, sir. You know very well I'd never thank you, Pat. So just a couple of quick questions, because the chair said we really have to wrap up. Karen, is there a reason, because there very well may be, that as it relates to places, especially nursing homes, elderly care, that stuff, where you said the data is at another place, the Oregon Health Agency, is there a reason we couldn't put in that data index on the website, which I think is huge, by the way? Thank you for constantly keeping us informed. Is there a reason we couldn't just identify the number of facilities, and of those, the number that we know are testing all their residents, or if they're not testing all, that are testing, and if so, how many? I mean, is there just some way we could provide that information both to the public and to ourselves on a real-time basis?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Burney, I will look into that, and especially if it's listed already on DHS's website, that would be a very simple thing to do, and much more efficient than if we actually have to call through each of those facilities and update our website every time one of them changes. But I will see if there's a simple way to get at least some of that data available.
Thank you very much. That'd be cool, but I get it. Sometimes it's not like you're running in 18 different directions concurrently. And Soraya, I've yet to have the opportunity, and I know the next agenda item we'll be talking more, but as Commissioner Farr, who obviously has been very on the ground, and I envy him that, and I have in other areas. But you know what? Tell me if I'm wrong. It feels to me like in public comment, we heard from, among others, people that are concerned that they're going to lose their homes to rent. We have people that are small landlords that if they don't get their rent, they're not going to make their mortgages. We have people that are even more vulnerable that you were discussing with us. The COVID-19 virus with social distancing has decreased hugely the number of beds available for the most vulnerable among us. So, I mean, am I wrong, or are we trying to roll a rock uphill, but the hill seems to be getting bigger?
Vice Chair Burney, I cannot say you're wrong. I think part of what we'll be talking about next is really how do we figure out how to manage these converging tides? So we have a large number of unsheltered folks here in our county, over 4,000 people who monthly receive homelessness services, and over 3,300 of whom are unsheltered. About 70% live in Eugene. We also, of course, are seeing a huge possible convergence of many different circumstances leading to people being very vulnerable and at risk of losing their housing, whether it's because of rents or mortgages. And so we are working with community partners now that the work of the Emergency Support Function 6, which was vulnerable populations, and the respite shelters has concluded. My next phase is working on partnering with various community organizations and jurisdictions throughout Lane County to identify the needs and gaps in this moment around housing and rental work, and to make sure that we are able to not only keep renters in their home, but also homeowners who may be at risk as well.
Thank you very much. That sounds like a yes to me. We're doing everything we can. Yeah,
we have to. Yes.
We have to. In fact, I would think Commissioner Farr would agree with this, but he made the statement, we know everybody wants a place to sleep. And I think we all feel like everybody has to have a place to sleep. Everybody has a right to have a place to sleep. We are humans, for God's sakes. That wasn't directed to you, Sarai. I'm sorry, that was just venting. Thank you. I know we're running late and have a lot to do. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Good conversation for everybody. Well, we'll move on to item 6B, discussion and work session over the COVID-19 eviction moratorium and rental assistance. We have several guests with us today. First, we'll have Steve Manella with Human Services speak and introduce all those guests, but I do need to just make one note. One of those guests is Terry McDonald from St. Vincent de Paul, and of course I am related to him, so I just want to make sure I declare that potential conflict of interest, but we are not making any decisions in this particular conversation, so it's not an actual conflict of interest, and I'm happy to participate in the discussion. So Mr. Manella, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'm going to hand it off to Sarai Johnson. Actually, she's going to be our MC for the discussion today.
Thank you. Great. Thank you, Chair Buck, and thank you, Steve. Yes, welcome to Terry McDonald, Darcy Phillips, and Jacob Fox, who are all here to give us some insight into what is happening in the affordable housing realm of Lane County, and also to be on hand for their experience and knowledge of these issues that are affecting renters. So we appreciate all of them attending and sharing their information today. And then we have Laurie Hauber, who will be talking about the Springfield Eugene Tenant Association recommendations in greater depth, and I believe prioritizing which ones she believes are most impactful and important for us to attend to. Steve Manella will cover what we are currently doing along these lines and what is happening at the state level. And then I will bring it back to what's going on with TAC and how this interfaces and dovetails with TAC work as well. So with that, I'd love to introduce, I guess we'll just start with Terry McDonald because he's at the top of the list. So Terry, would you like to go ahead and hop in?
I presume I'm unmuted now?
Yes.
Oh, good. Well, Chair Buck and commissioners, thank you for the opportunity to present. We do have good and cautionary news for you. During the pandemic months, March, April, and May, the number of tenants that were late on payment or have not been able to pay at St. Vincent de Paul is about 1,500 units, is about 2%. Which is fairly typical at any time of the year, whether it's a COVID season or not. So actually, we have not had a significant uptick in delinquency on payments. Some of that, I think, is due to most of the landlords in the area, for-profit and nonprofit, have been very aggressive in explaining what the issues were associated with the confusion around whether you should pay your rent or not. We also believe that the stimulus checks helped a great deal and that will continue to make it easier for people to pay their rents up through the end of July. Through the end of July and after that, after the stimulus checks for unemployment go away, we are concerned about the fall season moving forward. And I echo what Ms. Gaffney was saying about a convergence this winter of a difficult season coming forward between COVID-19 and of course the winter season for those that are unhoused, plus the continuously tight market for affordable housing and low vacancy rates across the board will present challenges, I think, as we move into the winter months. And with that, I believe I have made my comments.
Thank you so much, Terry. Darcy Phillips, Executive Director of Cornerstone Community Housing, is also here. Would you like to share your information with us as well, Darcy?
Sure. Thank you, Sarai and Chair Buck and Commission. Thank you for inviting us to share information. And I have to echo what Terry has said. For Cornerstone, for the months of March, April, and May, we collected 96% of all of our rents that were owed. We do have a few commercial spaces that are live work, and so that kind of drives that number down a little bit. Otherwise, we would be seeing about the same collection rate, about 98%. And I agree. I think that at this point, there's been stimulus checks. We know that the folks that lost their jobs they are receiving an additional, stipend for unemployment each week. And so our concerns are definitely what happens when that ends. What happens after this time frame of having these extra dollars, for the residents. I think that. It's obvious that folks are giving up other things to pay their rent, and we know that just across our portfolio at any time of the year. The first thing that folks give up to pay rent is generally food. So we've actually created some ways to get food to the front doors of our most vulnerable residents through delivery in partnership with Food for Lane County, and Northwest Community Credit Union has helped us with some of that. We've worked with other local partners to make sure that some of our single mamas have diapers and wipes and formulas for their kids. So we've been working on other pieces to help kind of offset. But in general, we're seeing the same rent collection that we would see, that we saw the same time frame of 2019. And we really do want to be proactive about what's going to happen when these other dollars dry up, and we want to make sure that our residents have resources. We never want an eviction. We want people housed, and we want them stable. So that's my input, and again, I think it really falls in line with what St. Vincent de Paul is seeing as well.
Thank you, Darcy. And Jacob Fox, Executive Director of Homes for Good as well. Would you please share what you have?
Sure. Good morning, Chair Buck, Vice Chair Bernie, and Commissioners. Honored to speak briefly with you today. So I want to start by just giving a shout out to the Homes for Good employees. We have 100 employees, and we were able within a 1-week period of time to have 70 of those employees begin teleworking, and to the employee, everyone just showed up in a positive way and in a supportive way, and we wouldn't be in the position that we're in without the strong support and hard work of all of our employees. I would also mention we've been meeting at the beginning of the crisis, the COVID-19 crisis to be specific. We started twice weekly meetings with our union leaders. And we've now gone to once a week, but the union has been incredibly supportive and just shown a lot of leadership during this time and in support of their members and in support of the organization more broadly. So in terms of financial impact, there's kind of two sort of ways that we're financially impacted. The first and the most dramatic is that because of our federal rent subsidies, people can contact us and ask us to increase our subsidy and decrease their share of the rent every month. So that's kind of been a growing financial impact to our programs. And the increased subsidy amount is around $92,000 a month of increased subsidy. And we don't know how that will continue to grow and compound over time. And then the other way that Terry and Darcy mentioned is that people are struggling to pay rent because they've lost jobs. But what we're seeing is something similar to Darcy, where we're having about a 5% non-payment level. But globally, as I look at sort of both impacts, about 10% of our households, so we serve over 5,000 households at any point in time, about 10% have been impacted across the board. The other thing I want to talk about is the CARES Act. The CARES Act did two things for housing authorities. One, it did give us some additional funding. I'll speak to that briefly in a moment. It also gave us a lot of regulatory relief. The regulatory relief is a bit of a two-edged sword. So there's some big reporting requirements that we simply don't have to do this year, which saves hundreds of hours of staff time. So that's a good thing. We'll have to pick that back up after we assume next year. But also we're not able to do inspections and some routine work orders. So there's kind of this big bubble of work that's being pushed out. When restrictions are released, we'll have to kind of attack that bubble and get caught up on work that's been deferred. Also, with the additional funding we've received from the CARES Act, we've received a little over $500,000 in Section 8 admin fee dollars. That money is separate than the housing assistance payment or rental subsidy dollars. So that money, we're spending that money on things like IT systems. We sent $50,000 to Community Lending Works for a security deposit loan program to help new voucher holders lease up in units. And then we have partnerships with organizations like Sponsors, Laurel Hill, and the VA VASH team. And we're just decided yesterday to send money to each of those organizations. So for the folks with high barriers that they serve, they will have funds to help with application fees and security deposits. Also, we're investing in videos. So we're required to do briefings for our Section 8 program. We have self-sufficiency programs. And we're basically going to be developing videos. So if this pandemic continues or if it resurges, that we'll be able to meet those requirements remotely rather than bringing people into our offices. So I will just pause there, and I know there'll be lots of questions. I want to be as brief as possible. So I'll pass it back to you, Sarai.
Thank you so much, Jacob. Next, we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about some recommendations. And as we transition to that, I would like to thank everybody for sharing what's happening across the spectrum in affordable housing in Lane County. And also note that people who are fortunate enough to have affordable housing units or housing vouchers typically pay 30% of their income for rent. However, many people in our community are paying more than that, sometimes significantly more than that, which I believe is something that Laurie has a little bit more insight in. So I'll pass it to Laurie Hobble from Oregon Law Center to share the CEDA recommendations and give some background on that. Laurie?
Thank you, Sarai. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. So good morning, Chair Buck and commissioners. I want to thank all of you for giving me and all of us this opportunity and for your serious consideration of ways that you as county commissioners can protect the most vulnerable renters in our community. So first, before I dive into the recommendations, I was asked to provide a quick overview of the rent moratorium status and pursuant to the governor's executive order. So I'm going to begin there, and just briefly, and I know everyone is generally familiar with the order. It began on April 1st, and as you know, it is, as of now, it is to end on June 30th. The moratorium prohibits essentially every aspect of an eviction for non-payment of rent, utility charges and fees, and prohibits late fees for non-payment. And so that includes termination notice, filing an FED to the execution of an FED judgment. And of course, that moratorium doesn't relieve rental payments. It only delays those payments. Once the moratorium is over, all the rent is due. So as of now, as you've heard, rent is due on July 1st. And which is what's going to happen if no further action is taken. And now, of course, that begs the question, well, will the governor extend the eviction moratorium? And as you know, that's kind of on shaky grounds because of the circuit court judge's ruling in Baker County. And where that case stands is it's now before the Supreme Court, and both sides have submitted briefs, and we're all just waiting for that decision. But of course, if the judge upholds, if the Supreme Court upholds the judge's decision, then the eviction moratorium could end even sooner than June 30th. And so with that in mind, and recognizing that in part because of this court case, regardless of the outcome, the governor is reluctant to extend the eviction moratorium. So what does that leave us with as a state and as a county for our options? Well, and of course, even with the end of the eviction, even if an extended eviction moratorium is enacted by the governor, there's additional protections still we need to see additional protections for people to be able to remain in their homes, because people need time to pay the accumulated rent and time to access rent assistance. So of course, what would be ideal is for the state legislature to meet during June, which hopefully they will, but there's no guarantee, and that the state will pass a statewide eviction moratorium. However, the stakes are high that if that doesn't happen, and then if there's nothing in place at the county level, we could have a major crisis on our hands starting in July, and as Terry mentioned, leading into the fall. And so what CETA is urging Lane County to do is to be prepared to act if the state doesn't act, to prevent thousands from losing their homes in the next few months. And then if the state ends up acting, Lane County, as commissioners, you could proceed similar to what Multnomah County did. They suspended the enforcement of their eviction moratorium after the governor issued her moratorium. So I guess the bottom line is I'm urging you to take action now, to be prepared if the state doesn't take action. And so when I'm saying action, what are the components of what advocates have asked the state to consider in a statewide eviction moratorium? So first and foremost, extending the eviction moratorium either to the end of the state of emergency or October 1, whichever is later. And I just want to note that in CETA's proposal, which we resent yesterday and I resent again this morning, is that we define the state of emergency based on Lane County's state of emergency. And then in addition to the eviction moratorium, what's also being asked of the state legislature is to consider a 6-month grace period. And this is the 6-month grace period that CETA has been highlighting in our written submissions and our testimony over the past few months, which would be very similar to the grace period that Multnomah passed. And once again, it would be about time to pay back rent. The other thing in addition to the grace period is credit protection. And credit protection is one of the other items that CETA has been advocating, which of course it's to prevent landlords from filing negative credit reports for the unpaid rent. Because as we all know, the negative impact on one's credit score makes it even more difficult to find housing. And so just briefly, why are these protections necessary? In the interest of time, I'm not going to go over my long list of all the arguments why renters in our county are vulnerable. And we've talked, and I've submitted documentation on the picture. The picture was rather bleak even before this pandemic. And so with this pandemic, obviously the thousands of people in Lane County who are cost burdened, struggling to pay rent every month, and our low hourly wage, then adding the pandemic to this is obviously a potential for disaster down the road. And I also want to mention that the unemployment disproportionately is impacting the most vulnerable. And looking at Lane County's unemployment filings in May, the sectors that are have the highest filings are sectors that have a preponderance of low-income workers, namely food services, accommodation, retail, and healthcare. And so we have multiple factors working against renters. And so time is of the essence to make a decision, but time is also of the essence in terms of giving renters time. And time, not only time to pay back their rent, but we also know many of the most vulnerable renters in our community, time isn't enough because they're living too close to the margin as it is. And so financial assistance is imperative. But that financial assistance, as we've seen, even from this first tranche of funding that was just released last week by Lane County, it takes time for the money to come down from the state. It takes time to actually get it out the door in Lane County. It takes time to assess eligibility. So my theme is time, which is why we're asking for not just an eviction moratorium, but also a grace period. And I do think from anecdotal information and other sources I've read, the increase in evictions for non-payment is a real risk. Experts are predicting a surge in evictions all over the country. And I've seen a few instances, including in Oklahoma County, where hundreds of FEDs were filed within a few days of the courthouse opening. And I also want to add that this is consistent with CETA's calls it's getting on its hotline. Since March 15th, over the past few months, more than 50% of CETA's hotline callers involve questions about evictions, inability to pay rent, and rent increases. And so even though our market is softening, I think it's very safe to assume that there's going to continue to be a demand for rental units, and we're not going to have hundreds or thousands of rental units sitting empty. So moving on, I'm about to end, but I just want to add, so eviction moratorium, 6-month grace period, credit protection are 3 key components that the state advocates are asking for, and also that CETA is asking for. I do want to note 2 additional measures that we feel strongly that should be considered by the county. Number 1 is no notices of rent increases for 90 days following the end of the eviction moratorium. Because as you know, many tenants are on the verge of homelessness, or 1 paycheck or now 1 stimulus check away from homelessness. And an increase in rent during this time could be all that it takes to send someone into homelessness. And then the other thing, because we're in a college town, asking landlords being able to demand actual damages as a lease break fee is very problematic for students who don't have the financial means to pay 4 months of worth of rent because they have to leave the area. And that's our final recommendation, or I should say our second to final recommendation. So in closing, of course, you've heard me say it enough, but I'm going to say it again. We urge you to take action in the next 3 weeks to help mitigate the financial devastation that so many households likely will experience if nothing is done. And of course, action taken now to prevent such catastrophic results will not only save lives and preserve the well-being of our communities for all its residents, it will save the county and taxpayers significant amounts of money, because as the tech report and multiple studies remind us, it is far cheaper to keep people housed compared to the cost that cities and counties incur for each individual who becomes unhoused. So with that, I want to thank you for your time, and I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you so much, Laurie. We'll have Steve Manella now share what is being done, information about the rent assistance program, his information about the e-board at the state level, and kind of, I think, dovetailing in with some of what Laurie was mentioning about the time that it takes, also recognizing the limitations on how much funding we have available and how many people are served with that. So with that, Steve Manella, please take it away.
Good morning, Chair Buck and commissioners. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. I want to go back to the beginning of the pandemic and talk about sort of both the state and federal response and what we're doing specifically here at Lane County. And of course, much of the work that I've been doing, I've been coordinating with Alex Tyler and our legislative efforts. But I want to remind you that on April 8th, early in the pandemic, the state of Oregon, the Speaker of the House drafted up LC 29 that was legislation that was to be put forward as part of a special session. And the special session, as you know, still has not occurred at the state level. So much of the work that I've been doing has been working with the state agencies and then working with the association that I belong to with e-board action, since the e-board has the ability to appropriate funding and specifically appropriate federal funding without the legislature's involvement. So the areas we've been focusing on are homeless prevention and rapid rehousing of folks that are homeless during the pandemic. And specifically LC 29, when it was drafted, to include the ability for counties such as Lane County or other jurisdictions to and the city of Eugene, for that matter, to have access centers or shelters and to set aside the zoning requirements. So I want to remind the commissioners that that's something that we continue to look towards for a special session, given the acquisition of 100 River Avenue and the ability eventually to use that building for broader homeless use. Additionally, the state legislature allocated, or the E-Board allocated $8.5 million for rental relief, which we as a county made available in the beginning of June after the state provided us with an agreement late in May and provided us with guidance on what was eligible to be spent. So out of that $8.5 million statewide, Lane County received $920,000, and we opened up a online application. It's a pre-application, and it's very easy for people to maneuver. It's a Survey Monkey, and with that Survey Monkey, to date, we received 1,295 applications. There were 507 people additionally that applied that were determined to be ineligible.
If there's another speaker on, if you could mute, that would be wonderful. So Mr. Manella can continue.
Thank you. The first amount of money that Lane County received was $920,000, and that will allow us to help about 420 households. And so what we are presently doing is we're reviewing the applications, and we're getting back to folks that have applied. And then of the close to 1,300 people who've applied, what we will do is as we receive more money, we will get back to those individuals. So this past week on Friday, the Legislative Emergency Board approved another $55 million of rental relief out of the CARES Act money that the state of Oregon received, and an additional $20 million to assist affordable housing providers who are losing income due to rent, and $15 million for additional energy assistance. So we're in the process of looking at implementation of the CARES Act funding from the state of Oregon. It will be available between the end of June and the end of December. So as a county, we're looking at having available about $900,000 a month. So about the same amount of money we had available during this month through the end of the year for rental assistance. So we'll be able to serve additional households. We have closed our pre-application momentarily. We're having to update it. The new money that's available raised the income limitation from 50% of AMI to 80% of AMI. So there's a broader group of people who will be eligible to apply for assistance. I think on the state level, and I think Jacob maybe mentioned this in his comments, is that what we're finding is what is called Class C rentals in the private market are seeing the highest rate of non-payment. So as you can imagine, our affordable housing projects subsidize a great deal of the rent and make the rent more affordable. And in the private market, people in Eugene, Springfield on average are paying $1,300 a month for a two-bedroom apartment. So that's quite a bit different than what people are paying in affordable rental housing units. And that's where a lot of the demand for rental assistance is coming from. Additionally, I want to thank Karen Gaffney. We made available the COVID-19 hotline at the county for folks that are not able to maneuver the online application. And we assisted folks also who are monolingual in Spanish through that hotline. And so I think it's a great example of how Lane County employees are rising to the occasion to assist us during this time of COVID-19 and trying to make sure that these services are accessible to all. Finally, I want to mention that our agency partners in providing the rental assistance are Community Sharing in Cottage Grove, Siusla Outreach Services in Florence, Lane Shelter Care, Catholic Community Services, and then St. Vincent de Paul's Family Program. So all of those organizations are helping us with doing the heavy lifting in getting the rent assistance out to people in our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And now, Chair Buck and Commissioners, I'll close out this section of the presentation by bringing this kind of back to TAC in some ways. As you probably realize, homelessness in our community is a housing problem primarily, and looking at the potential for so many people to be really truly at risk of losing their housing is daunting, especially in the face of not only already having a very high population of people who are unhoused, and of that group, so many who are unsheltered, and having lost capacity in the system to handle sheltering. It is a very critical issue for us to address right now. The experts, quote, experts out there have estimated that homelessness could increase by as much as 10 to 45%. So the estimates are kind of all over the place, but they're based on different metrics. So one of the metrics is a 0.65 to 1 ratio for every 1 point percentage increase of unemployment. So given that we have seen an unemployment rate jump to, I believe last I saw 14 plus %, that could mean about 9% increase in people who lose housing and become homeless. So we're really looking to prevent that. TAC depends on at least maintaining and also increasing housing and shelter capacity along with improvements to systems. So on that, one thing that we have the policy team for TAC has put to the surface for this coming year, this fiscal year, is rapid resolution, which is a conversational strategy to help people who are at risk of losing housing or who have just recently lost housing. It's called a shelter door conversation. So the idea behind rapid resolution is to help people access their own assets and resources, relationships, and other things that they might have available to them in their social network to help them rapidly resolve their homelessness situation. The other that has risen to the top that wasn't included on our very first top 5 recommendations, but has emerged as something very important and is also a City of Eugene priority, is landlord engagement. In the long-term, landlord engagement strategy is to help to increase the ability for people to use vouchers, whether it's housing choice vouchers, but especially permanent supportive housing vouchers. So those are really hard to place at this time in our community, and we'd like to engage more landlords in participating in that program. At the immediate moment, landlord engagement will need to really kind of circle around how to support landlords in tenant supports and tenant rights, and if needed, technical assistance or perhaps other creative resources that can help landlords weather this time as well. So really looking at kind of hitting this from every angle, supporting tenants with rental assistance and whatever else we can offer to them, and also supporting landlords with making sure that they know what's going on and how they can apply kind of all of the rules at the right time. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Chair Buck, for Commissioner discussion and questions.
Thank you very much, everybody. Is there any question or comment from commissioners? I think we're all kind of soaking in all the information here at first. Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I'd like to zero in on the questions that or kind of comments that Ms. Hobble mentioned. Here's what I wrote down. Be prepared to act if the state doesn't act. Extend in the next 3 weeks, extend the moratorium to October 1st, which I guess is the eviction moratorium. Work on the grace period and work on credit protection. Could you expand on particularly the 3 things, the timeline for the eviction moratorium, the grace period, and the credit protection? Those 3 things, could you expand on those?
Sure. So the reason we're focused on those is because we feel those are the 3 most pertinent aspects of protecting renters, vulnerable renters, and keeping them in their homes. And the extended eviction moratorium wasn't something we had been advocating for in any materials we sent all of you until recently, because prior to the court case, it was looking like that eviction moratorium was going to be extended by the governor. But now that there's this uncertainty at the state level, that's why we added the eviction moratorium to these 3. And so the reason we said October 1st, 2020 is because we're trying to be consistent with what's being advocated for at the state level for our state legislature to act. That is not hard and fast. And certainly you as commissioners in Lane County could decide on a different date. With respect to the grace period, we happen to advocate for a 6-month grace period because we were trying to follow closely what Multnomah County had passed early on in this pandemic. And that's what they passed, a 6-month grace period. For the reasons we've articulated in prior testimony and what I said today. And that would give vulnerable tenants 6 months to pay the accrued rent, utilities, and other fees. And it would also prohibit late fees from being charged during that 6-month period. And certainly the other piece would be encouraging landlords and tenants to work together to come up with a payment plan. And that couldn't be codified, but certainly that could be language that's added in an ordinance that Lane County were to draft. And that is language in the Multnomah County moratorium. The credit protection, once again, that's something we have felt strongly about from day one because of the harmful effects that negative credit reports have on people's ability to secure housing. And so it could be disastrous for someone to lose their housing and on top of it turned into a credit agency and then they're unable to find new housing in part because of that. And we know the other impacts that credit scores, negative credit scores have on people's lives. So that's why we focus on those 3. But like I said, certainly, we're also very concerned in particular about rent increases this time, because any percentage of a rent increase, like I said, could be the tipping point for someone to lose their housing because they're unable to pay. So Commissioner Sorensen, is that, I hope I answered your question. I'm not sure.
Yes, you did. And my second question is for Mr. Manella. These numbers seem just overwhelming, and it is quite possible that Lane County, not to mention the federal or state government, would just financially not be able to handle this. I originally requested this work session before the board was informed that the state had provided money, but that money apparently has all been, subscribed, I think is the government term. Is there any way to determine what the magnitude of this problem is going to be over the next few months? I mean, in some ways, maybe the St. Vincent de Paul and Cornerstone experience over the last few months of 98% of tenants paying rent may mean that it's not that big of a problem. But I just want to get a sense of whether we're talking about millions of dollars, tens of thousands of dollars, tens of millions of dollars. Just what is the magnitude of the problem measured by money?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Sorensen, I'm going to start off by saying that the House of Representatives had passed a HEROES Act, and in that HEROES Act, they had $200 billion for rental assistance nationally. And to scope that down to Oregon and to Lane County, I think that some of the factors were mentioned by Terry McDonald and Darcy and Jacob Fox and Laurie, but the state of Oregon, I have not seen anything that predicts for the state of Oregon. I have seen the same information Sarai has that some of the national homeless advocacy agencies have sent out to say if there isn't governmental intervention at the federal and state and local level, we could see homelessness increase by 40%. I am going to ask Jacob Fox. I know that he was part of a Senate panel, and he has been hearing some of the information that's being provided by some of the larger private sector groups in the state of Oregon about what they're predicting. Jacob?
Yeah, I don't have the specific numbers at my fingertips, although I'll pull them up after this and send it out to the Lane County commissioners. I think the private sector, as they communicated on the Senate hearing on Friday, were sort of in a similar position to Terry, Darcy, and myself, where we're seeing in Terry's case 2, in Darcy's case 4, in our case 5% non-payment. But that's in the affordable rental space. What they communicated, and you alluded to this, Steve, was that Class A and Class B, so for folks with more incomes, they aren't seeing a dramatic trend of non-payment in rent, but the C class apartment communities where service workers and other low-wage workers live, they're estimating like a 10% non-payment rent was what I heard. I think what the industry groups are communicating is what happens after the eviction moratorium is lifted and property management companies have to basically address the non-payment of rent. We could see a huge influx. Again, I don't have those numbers, but I know surveys are being done and I can pass that information along once I get it.
Commissioner Sorensen, I just want to add, Jacob, I happen to have those numbers in front of me. And so the estimate of what Oregon needs is 1.2 billion. And what I have for that number is to help people at very low income levels, namely 0 to 50%, to pay rent to make it through the next 12 months. So that's the estimate that was shared by the Housing Alliance.
Are those numbers aggregating all counties in the state? Is that county resources, and of which ours would be about 9% of that? Or is that state resources that would be required to fund the state effort in dealing with this problem?
My understanding is it's just the aggregate of what is needed across the state. And then the other thing about the Class C housing that Jacob mentioned, for naturally affordable housing, the non-payment rate in May was actually 18%. So that is an alarmingly large difference compared to the low non-payment rates experienced by St. Vinny's and Cornerstone and other and Homes for Good. But so the unsubsidized non-payment rate is much higher.
Commissioner Burney.
Thank you. I feel like we're having two at least conversations here. I want to first thank the people that are not on the Lane County payroll for giving of their time today. And I have first a question, and that question is this. I'd like to see this. I don't know if it's possible, but for each one of the 6 recommendations to protect impacted renters, and Laurie, I don't know if you'd be able to offload county staff to do a little of this, but I would like to see for each measure, what, if anything, the cost to the county would be, the positives for that particular measure, the negatives, and the required action from us. Just an analysis on an Excel spreadsheet. That would be helpful because I would love to move forward on all of them, but I need to know the resource requirement, whether that's even too much time to do such a thing, but I don't think so. And it would give us a basis to say, here's the resources we're getting in, here's the basis upon which we can allocate X, here's the gaps, here's how we can apply to either state or federal agencies that have resources that can align, but I just need a frame of reference. So that would be my first request. And then moving quite to a different level, no matter how good or bad I hear of this, what I'm hearing is catastrophe this fall and winter. And I've heard from people that oftentimes every winter there's a catastrophe and we start planning for that catastrophe too late. So my other question, and I'd like to request first those that are not county to respond, is like, I don't ask you to be prophetic and talk about the exact dimensions of what we're looking at, even come fall, even if we do all these things and October 1st occurs. But what do you think we need to put in place now or be thinking about now to deal with winter? And if you don't have an answer, that's fine. But I would love your thoughts on
that. Commissioners, this is Terry McDonald. There is obviously a number of things that would be helpful at this point. We know that food insecurity is going to grow as the SNAP allocations are cut back. That's something we can plan for. That's something we can look at in terms of how we can gather those necessary extra food resources. And I think that would be prudent. Likewise, I fully expect, myself at least, that it would be good to start figuring out how many folks we can disperse, because as Ms. Gaffney was pointing out, dispersal of the population is absolutely the best way to prevent the spread of COVID-19, along with the safe practices and washing your hands and so forth. But there is also going to be a need for how we're going to house larger numbers, especially if we have a cold winter, when things like the Egan warming centers are going to be very difficult to run if we have an upsurge of COVID-19. So a series of contingency plans around that would be very helpful. This last year, last few months, we hit a very unique situation where we had, because of the shutdown, a labor force that could pivot into the shelter activities and not disrupt the very low unemployment rate, because suddenly we had a lot of people that were unemployed. Likewise, the county fairgrounds entirely shut down and that was the first time I can remember the county fairgrounds shutting down entirely. Likewise, I don't anticipate that we'll go back to shutting down commercial activities entirely this winter because of the safe practices that we've been trying to put in place. So since we don't have the federal money likely coming in this fall and winter, and it's unlikely that the state budgets are going to be very generous as we move into the next fiscal year, finding ways to do the best we can with the resources we have is a planning process that we should be looking forward to right now.
This is Jacob. I completely agree with Terry as always. I would say assistance for landlords that are struggling to pay their mortgages, and at the same time serving people with low incomes is going to be kind of a critical need in our community as well. We have over 700 landlords in our network, and we're making some requests to HUD for waivers and trying to think about creative ways that we can support that landlord network, especially the many mom and pop landlords that provide a home to people with low incomes in Lake County.
Well, thank you. Good questions. Any final comments or thoughts for our speakers today? Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck. This is a well-assembled group of speakers today. Thank you, each one of you, for providing different perspectives. I noticed that the first three speakers were talking about how the late rent payments are very low for subsidized and low-income housing, and evidently it does get much higher when it's private housing that's involved. My question, Mr. Manella, if you're still listening,
yes,
is that during the Operation 365 housing homeless veterans, we had an extensive landlord outreach. Kitty Piercy and I each had a long list of landlords that we specifically called individually to help pay for the food, basically, of unhoused veterans. Do we have records on how that fared and how that extensive landlord outreach occurred? And is that something that we could reinstate for the emergency that we're in right now? Because Commissioner Burney asked a great question. One that was burning on my mind is the spreadsheet, to provide a spreadsheet showing where these costs are going to be generated. And a subset of that is how do we pay for the amount of money that it's going to take to provide the relief that we need. So Mr. Manella, is there any information on the 2015 efforts?
Chair Buck, Commissioner Farr, we should be able to find those records. And I know in discussion with Sarai Johnson, as she mentioned, putting together another effort around landlord engagement and working with Homes for Good and the other organizations that are presenting today makes great sense to me. We need to be out ahead of this. You know, a number of the situations that people will find themselves in can be helped through having people who are available to do mediation. You know, because sometimes, you know, these are all legal matters, and the level of sophistication for both the landlord community and for the tenants, you know, both parties can use assistance in trying to figure out the best way forward.
Thank you for that response, Steve. You know, we were pretty successful back then, but it was a very different issue. We were basically asking landlords to participate in the program, and some of it was accepting vouchers. In fact, a large amount of it was accepting vouchers. A little bit different this time because we have people who are actually already housed, who are in danger of becoming unhoused, and we've been talking about that for quite some time. You know, Jacob Fox mentioned that many of the landlords are mom and pop, with one or two or just a couple of units, providing relatively low income
low rental housing, and not just in the cities of Eugene and Springfield, but throughout the county, in Cottage Grove, for instance. So, bearing in mind that the burden, I hate to call it a burden, I mean, the necessity to make certain that people aren't evicted because of a lack of payment of rent during this period of time, it's essential that everybody becomes engaged in this, and that we help address the issue on as many different fronts as we possibly can. So producing the data from 2015 would be interesting to see, and engaging more people in making certain the landlords are an active participant in the relief. Thank you.
Before we go to a second round, I want to make sure everybody else has had something to say. Commissioner Bozovich.
Thank you. I got a couple things I want to cover. First, I appreciate the help of some of our partners with our CAP in distributing that initial 900,000. But my understanding is the state has allocated an additional 55 million to rent assistance. And if I do my math correct, it's another 6 million coming into the county. The HUD housing authorities around this state do this as their main business. And even that additional 55 million would be basically a 21% increase in their current rental subsidy budgets. I would advocate that we look strongly to partnership with Homes for Good, our local housing authority, to do the distribution of that second wave of rental assistance. Because I know personally, Siusla Outreach Services is minimally staffed. And if we're going to start turning some of these agencies that have other primary functions like victim services for domestic violence and other basic needs into rental assistance programs, that's going to really, it's a significant change in their programmatic structure. Whereas we could take an existing structure over at Homes for Good and really utilize that existing structure and almost have no change in their business operations. So I just want to put that out there, that my strong suggestion is with that next round of funding that comes, and that we continue as a board advocating for additional federal funding, because we certainly do not have local resource here for this, that we get the Homes for Good folks involved in that distribution of that rental assistance, because of their expertise, because they're set up and the infrastructure is there. Second, I want to address this issue of extending the eviction moratorium. Yes, there is a court case that could possibly rule the governor's emergency declarations unconstitutional. But there is a constitutional option for the governor to immediately jump into an Article 10A declaration of emergency and basically re-up everything she's done so far. Of course, it would be limited to 30 days until the legislature can meet to extend that. But it's a very clear pathway that if the Supreme Court upholds the Baker County Circuit Court judge, that she can jump into and have in place basically within an hour. And it's probably the option she should have started with, and that's part of the arguments that were happening in that court in Baker County. So that said, I'm pretty sure we're not going to see some kind of sudden and big gap if the Supreme Court upholds the Baker County decision. My guess is you'll see a new executive order within minutes, if not an hour of that decision, utilizing Article 10A. Finally, as we talk about a spreadsheet for these 6 recommendations, there are 2 things I'd like to see in that spreadsheet that is going to involve our county council's input. First of all is our statutory authority to do any of those 6 items and where our basis of authority is. And second, what our liability is for taking action in that area. One of the things we have is a statewide rent control that was passed by the legislature. I was trying to go through Senate Bill 608 and 4001 quickly to look for whether it preempts local action on rent control. And one of the things we're being asked to do in this is to no rent increases, the number 6. Does that violate that state law? Are we, and that's a question really for legal counsel to research and recommend to us. And do we have that capability? Is an extended eviction moratorium a taking? And are we liable for compensation for that taking? And do we have the resources for that taking? I'd like to know the answers to those questions before we take that kind of action. And I think the board should be advised of that. I don't want to have what we're doing to help renters that desperately need assistance end up enriching a bunch of lawyers, in lawsuits, and then costing the county resources at the same time that could be spent helping people. I mean, we've done so much as a county trying to assist people when it comes to homelessness and housing. And I just don't want to see that wasted by taking precipitous action that brings about legal actions. So if I can add to that kind of spreadsheet of pros and cons, legal authorities and legal liabilities that are involved in those actions, because I'm pretty sure that it's pretty easy to look at a lot of those and look at them as a taking and in need of either compensation or will be involved in issues, or they may actually have been preempted by state law. So I'd like to understand that. Multnomah County does a lot of stuff because they have hugely deeper pockets than we do and are probably capable of fighting the lawsuits and all that much easier than we are. And I just really want us to be careful. So a couple of things, just to reiterate, I'd like to see us get Homes for Good more involved in the next round and maybe utilize their infrastructure for rental assistance distribution. I'm not so concerned about the court cases. And finally, I really want to understand our legal authorities and liabilities around these 6 recommendations.
I'd like to add some thoughts of my own here. I do think, we're being warned that fall is going to be a very challenging time for renters, unless there's some more significant revenue generated from the federal government through the state and through the county to help renters be able to pay their rents and landlords to be able to pay their mortgages. I'm hopeful that there'll be another CARES Act, but you never know until it actually happens and what it's actually going to be utilized for. When it comes to CEDA's recommendations, I completely understand why all of them are listed. As somebody who had a property management firm and does a lot for affordable housing, there are very different rules for those subsidized housing. Is somebody speaking?
I can't hear you.
If you could go on mute, that would be great.
I can't hear. I couldn't hear you before, Diana. What? Okay.
Steve Dingle, can you go on mute? Thanks. There's a clear difference between the rules for those that are in subsidized housing versus those that are market rate housing. There are a lot more protections for tenants in subsidized housing and the way that they function and what they can and cannot be evicted for than there are for market rate housing. And so we utilize, our Section 8 housing vouchers in order to help those that are in market rate housing. And that calculation for rent that folks could potentially get some subsidized housing for is a formula that I believe is completely out of date, because most of our rents in our area can be higher than what that formula comes out to be. So they are priced out. The voucher system is priced out of the market. There's not enough rentals available at the formula calculation that the voucher will allow them to participate in. I think that's a major problem that needs to be fixed. It's not something that the county necessarily has jurisdiction over, but it is something that we can advocate for. I also want to touch briefly on the credit protection issue, which I wholeheartedly agree with CETA on. In many of these companies that manage property, they use a software system. So they're processing rents come in, and as soon as the rent is processed into their software system, it automatically triggers a response to the credit bureaus. This has been up and running for several years now, and in some ways was really good because you could build credit for renters. But in this case, clearly could damage credit for renters in a very serious way, because we know that their future landlord who is reviewing an application can easily grab their credit scores and evaluate based on that information. And you would hope that most people would understand the timeline between here and here is a challenging one because of COVID, but that is not something that they are required to consider. And to ensure that they can keep their credit clean through no fault of their own, I believe is extremely important to make sure that they can succeed and move on to the next house or apartment or wherever they want to rent. So there's some technical aspects behind each and every one of the items listed. I think it is a good idea that we come back and determine what we can legally do at the county and what items are maybe state level, that then we can move to our legislative committee to see if that's something they want and recommend the board to pursue. Because the technical aspects for each and every one of them could be state or county or city, and we don't know necessarily which one's which right now. I just wanted to at least add my thoughts on that particular item. We do need to move forward with our agenda. Is there anybody that has a brief wrap-up statement? Commissioner Burney and then Commissioner Sorensen.
So my wrap-up statement is this. I believe I've heard a majority of board members identify they want to take action, but before they do, some sort of spreadsheet analysis with some criteria needs to be developed. I don't disagree with Commissioner Bozovich at all. I mean, I think it would be foolhardy to make decisions without knowing what our authority or liabilities are. That informs good decision-making. And finally, I'm trying to do what you asked, Chair, a wrap up. I know Commissioner Sorensen may have other, and finally, I really appreciate what Mr. McDonald identified in terms of right now planning for the potentiality of the areas he discussed, whether it has to do with food insecurity, how many people, given our resources, can we disperse, and how many more can we help? Contingency planning needs to occur right now, and I will be interested in hearing periodically how that contingency planning is going. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Sorensen.
Thank you very much. I'll make this very brief. I agree with Commissioner Bozovich. I agree with Commissioner Burney, and I also think that we ought to embark on another work session right away, because I don't think it's sustainable that we can just give people money. I think we need to think about what are people going to be doing at their homes if we are able to give them some resources. And I think we ought to be thinking about local jobs programs and ways of people to be productive with the money that is being sent out. And then last but not least, I think that we need to make sure that we are well within our authorities. So I think the speed at which we are being asked to act, that is within the next 3 weeks, requires us to move forward rapidly with another session. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, everybody. This is a big topic, and it sounds like we want to pursue it further. So with that, I'm going to skip down to item 8B, which is our order and resolution 20-06-09-06 in the matter of approving a resolution in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and Lane County's commitment to putting in the work to achieve racial equity. And with us is Mo Young, our Equity and Access Coordinator.
Chair Buck, I'm going to just make some introductory comments, and then Mo will dive into an overview of the proposed board order and resolution. I believe we have the chair, the co-chair, one of our co-chairs of the Equity and Access Advisory Board available as well. But I just want to provide some opening comments to this. Appreciated the public comments you heard this morning from Laurie Trigger, who has been a member of our Equity and Access Advisory Board, and she commented on a lot of the work that Lane County has done over the last several years related to equity, access, inclusion. And, you know, I will just reflect and say 6 years ago, we didn't have an Equity and Access Advisory Board. We didn't have an Equity and Access Coordinator in Mo Young and in that position. We didn't have a recruitment coordinator in HR focused on diversity in our workforce. We didn't have a procurement manager in finance focused on increasing the diversity of hiring of women-owned and minority-owned businesses. We didn't have a focus on racial equity and the implementation of an equity lens in our organization. And you see, you know, systematically, step by step, we've really made and continue to make investments in improving and recognizing the need to improve the way in which we use equity as a lens to view all issues in our organization, and the way in which we can systematically change what needs to be changed in our institution and in our systems. I wanted to just start by reflecting on the fact that we are facing a defining moment in our nation, in our state, and in our local community. Without question, we've seen this uprising across the country, and it's really a moment to examine not just who we are, but who we want to be as a people. And I've thought a lot, and my wife and I have talked a lot about how we were raised, and our generation was raised not to see race, that race was something that, you know, we should be colorblind, that race didn't matter, that we were all equal. And I think there's been an evolution to that thinking as time has gone on, just from my generation. And we've talked a lot about how we're raising our children, that in fact, we need to have an honest conversation about how race does matter in our country, and that there still are inequities that exist. And we need to be open and honest and truthful about those and face those head on. I carry with me this pocket constitution. When I journeyed to the nation's capital in 1997 to work in the US Senate as an intern. And I've carried this with me ever since, this pocket constitution. I've reflected on this recently. The First Amendment to our US Constitution, the last line reads, "The right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances." And it seems to me that that's what we are witnessing and participating in throughout our country and throughout local communities in our country, is the people, large numbers of diverse people throughout our country, peaceably assembling and seeking a redress of grievances, asking for their government to listen, to solve problems that remain.
And so that's, I wanted to start with that's to me, through my lens, what the Black Lives Movement is about. You've seen a lot of these different illustrations, particularly on social media. And we've sent out a picture of a young girl holding up a sign that says, we sent this out to our employees last week. We said Black Lives Matter, never said only Black Lives Matter. We know all lives matter. We just need your help with Black Lives Matter because Black lives are in danger. And so this is one of the questions that has come up is what is the Black Lives Movement about, and why are we having a discussion about that in this resolution that the board is considering today? And I wanted to reflect on the fact that this is a moment of awakening, a moment of reconciling with the truth. I had an opportunity when several of us were in Washington, D.C. this last February before, just as this global pandemic was hitting us, to visit the National Museum of African American History and Culture. And on the wall there, if you have an opportunity when the museums open back up to visit this, I encourage folks, if you haven't, to do it. It's an incredible museum. On the wall, there's a quote from Ida B. Wells that says, "The way to right wrongs is to turn the light of truth upon them." And I think that is what we're seeing here with this national movement and conversation, is a discussion about where inequities continue to exist and what we can, should, and need to do, particularly in our local communities, to right those wrongs. And so I want to also make a comment about the why Lane County, and we're seeing many of these things happen across the country and here in our local community. And we have, as the board has seen, sent out daily emails to our employees and talked about recently the culture in our organization, the culture that we continue to try and reinforce, a culture that allows for the expression of opinions, diverse opinions, a culture of learning and growing together, a call for all of us to face the reality of these systemic inequities that remain, and for us to identify solutions in our local community. We've said this is not a political statement, just as wearing a face covering during a global pandemic is not a political statement, but rather a way for all of us to recognize the truth and the facts around where inequities exist and our responsibility to deal with those head on. So pause there, and I will just say that I think we recognize the history of racial disparities and systemic inequities that exist here in Lane County, in education, in health, in employment, in incarceration, and in many other places. We can't fix all of those things today, but we can begin a process to understand the inequities that do exist, confront those truthfully, and have an open and honest dialogue about the best way to begin solving some of those inequities. So that is a lot to put on your plate and to open the conversation. But that is I think what was intended, what was the beginning for us of this opening of a dialogue and awakening around the continued need to address those issues. So I want to ask Mo, and if we have DJ on the line, to walk through the discussion at the Equity and Access Advisory Board and the resolution that is in front of you, and then we welcome your questions and comments.
All right, thank you, Steve. Commissioners, Chair Buck, my name is Mo Young, for those of y'all who are listening. I'm the Equity and Access Coordinator for the county. I'd like to give y'all a little bit of background and then address a couple of things that that I feel like need addressing. On June 2nd, so a week ago, the Board of County Commissioners directed staff to work with the Equity and Access Advisory Board, who was meeting the following day, to draft a resolution that would be brought back to the Board of Commissioners for consideration today. The 3 points that were listed for the resolution is that it would recognize this moment in time as one where we have a choice to make as an agency and a community, to list actionable items for Lane County, including the recruitment and hiring of a diverse workforce, especially in law enforcement, and that the resolution should not focus on property damage. Although this resolution addresses these 3 points, it does not go into specifics such as recruitment and hiring of law enforcement. Lane County continues to invest in recruitment and hiring, and the Equity and Access Advisory Board and county leadership are seeking to create additional focus on institutional policies and practices that we haven't called attention to, including in law enforcement, health, and planning, that have resulted in institutional disparities. I also want to note that when you go to the Black Lives Matter page online, you will see that their hashtag What Matters 2020 focus. It says the focus is on issues concerning racial injustice, police brutality, criminal justice reform, Black immigration, economic injustice, LGBTQIA+ and human rights, environmental injustice, access to healthcare, access to quality education, and voting rights and suppression. I believe that this resolution opens the door to addressing all of the places where Lane County touches each of those systems, including but not limited to law enforcement. Secondly, it's important to know that it's not just blatant racism that harms Black people in unequal ways, it's all of the systems. It's also important to remember that COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting Black and brown people across the nation and also here in Lane County. These systems are here in Lane County. Again, we're looking at healthcare, planning, business, education, and more. And we have an opportunity to make real anti-racist changes that will make Lane County the best county in which to live, work, and play for everyone. And then I wanted to address a concern that was brought to my attention yesterday. I understand that there's some discomfort with the fourth whereas, which reads, whereas incidents such as the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and all of the other countless Black people who have been murdered by vigilantes who saw a Black body and equated it with a threat. I wanted to just take just a moment to explain that although staff and the Equity and Access Advisory Board understand that those are technically alleged murders, the whole world saw the videos and the words were chosen because the group wanted to be sure to make a statement based on what they saw. To use the word alleged felt like downplaying what happened, and no one was comfortable with that. And now I'm going to pass the mic to DJ Kelly Quattrochi, who is one of the co-chairs of the Equity and Access Advisory Board. And DJ is going to say a few words and then read the resolution for the record.
Thank you, Mo, and good morning to the commissioners and Chair Buck. Special hello to Commissioner Bozovich. I'm excited to continue chatting with you. I'm a part of your district, and this is our first time that we get to engage. And as Mo said, I am one of the co-chairs of the Equity and Access Board and a newly appointed member. Also echoing what Mo previously said, I do want to acknowledge that some of the language in this resolution might seem uncomfortable. For us, especially for those of us who are not Black identified, but I think it's our responsibility as people who are not Black and are in positions of authority and power to acknowledge the realities that this is what Black people have dealt with for generations. That part of that acknowledgement is to understand that the recent deaths are more than just loss of life, but are part of systemic racism and are in fact a murder of each of these people, whether or not our justice system allows for that acknowledgement. We need to sit with our own discomfort to acknowledge this, because without that acknowledgement, we'd be doing nothing more than lip service. And from what I've been listening to today, you all are not just lip servants. I think that we are in a position to start the process of change. And I want to let you all know that the Equity and Access Board is behind you in that process and excited to take this work on. I am going to read the resolution, and then I will turn it back to you all for any questions or comments. So, in the matter of approving a resolution in support of the Black Lives Matter movement and Lane County's commitment to putting in the work to achieve racial equity. Whereas the Board of Commissioners acknowledges that Black Lives Matter, and whereas the Board of Commissioners acknowledge that over the course of the past few weeks, we have been again reminded that police brutality and general disregard for Black people's lives are prevalent within the United States. And whereas the Board of Commissioners acknowledges that this continued assault on Black people have caused the loss of numerous lives for no reason other than racist biases. And whereas Incidents such as the murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, and all of the countless Black people who have been murdered by vigilantes who saw a Black body and equated it with a threat. And whereas incidents such as these show that there is a systemic and prolific nature to racism built into the foundation of the United States, and such as these actions go on without proper recognition, adjudication, or conviction. And whereas racial profiling and abuse of power happens here in Lane County, and whereas Lane County shares the pain and anger of Black people in our county, state, and nation, and whereas we stand in solidarity with the Black community and strive to hold our county departments and ourselves not only to the only standard, that will begin to protect us, one of equity and justice that centers all people, not just those with the most privilege. And whereas now is a time of action and we cannot be inactive in addressing this issue. Now, therefore, the County Commissioners of Lane County orders and resolves the following. 1, to work with community members and staff to acknowledge and address the root causes of inequities in Lane County services and outcomes. 2, to work with community members and staff to invent or find anti-racist policies that can eliminate the racial inequities that exist. 3, to use an anti-racist and racial equality lens to assess current and future policies and programs. 4, to communicate with the community, including county's employees, about the root causes of racial inequities, as well as the corrective action that has been or will be taken. And 5, when policies fail, Lane County will wholeheartedly and enthusiastically start over and seek out new and more effective anti-racist policies until they work. Thank you so much.
Thank you all so much for presenting this to us today. I will open the floor to comments or questions. Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair Buck, and I'll be very, very brief. The request last week had 3 points in it, as Mo read out loud, and the resolution that was brought back to us by the written by the Equity and Access Board really covers those 3 points very well. It goes a little bit more into depth also. So I believe that the resolution we see before us really covers the request that was made by the Board of County Commissioners. And so we recognize this moment in time as one where we have a choice to make it as an agency, and as a community. That's pretty essential that everybody recognizes that we really have a unique moment in time right now. And I believe that today we will have an opportunity to act on that. And then the second was to list actionable items for Lane County, including the recruitment and hiring of a diverse workforce, especially in law enforcement. Now, I'll touch on that just a little bit. The Equity and Access Board met last Wednesday, and I was not on the panel, but I was in the audience listening. Mr. Mo Heisky was there too. And Mo, you acknowledged that I was there a couple of times. The board had a very strong discussion about the action items, and had a discussion about how the action items could be actually rolled into the resolution itself. And Mo, could you touch a little bit on that, on the discussion that the board had about specific action items and how that was resolved toward the end of the board meeting last Wednesday?
Sure. I'll kick it off, and then if DJ or Steve has anything to add, I'll ask them to chime in. The board had a pretty in-depth conversation about what the purpose of resolutions are and about the work that is to come. So we talked a lot about how this resolution creates an opportunity for the county, for the organization, and for the Equity and Access Advisory Board to work with community who is affected by these inequities that we see in our work, and to really think through what are the inequities, what do we have the ability to touch, and then what are the policies, the anti-racist policies that the county might implement in order to address them. So we talked a lot about how this resolution is not the end, it is the beginning. And we talked at length about how there needed to be some sort of accountability built in for all of us, right? And so one of the things that the advisory board is really hoping to hear from you all is that there's that you expect to hear updates and perhaps, you know, a timeline for when those updates will be
Thank you, Mo. That covered it very well. They spoke for more than just a few minutes about this. And you engaged them a couple of times talking about your personal work plan out of your office and how this resolution could hold your work plan accountable. Can you explain that just a little bit?
Sure. I feel like it's been more than a week since that meeting, so I'm trying to go back in my brain for where exactly that conversation was. But this gives my office, the advisory board, and the county at large real direction for how to do this work. And I think, for me, the main key is engaging with community to identify the issues, engaging with community to identify what potential solutions would be, and then being real transparent with that with the whole community about what we did and what we see that's working and what we see that we need to fix. We need to, go back to the drawing board and find new policies or different policies that maybe exist or maybe they don't. And maybe we get to invent them and other people will, model their work after ours. And I think, I'm trying to think of what I said at the meeting. Goodness, I should have taken notes. I think the other, oh, you wrote down? Tell me what I said, please, Commissioner Farr.
You talked about Equity 2.0, the Equity 2.0 plan with its performance measures, and how performance measures could be actually built into your work plan that can be accountable when you make both quarterly and annual reports to the Board of County Commissioners, so that there actually would be measurable criteria or measurable points or strategies in your work plan and tactics in your work plan that could be reported on the progress.
Right, and that we would write that into,
yeah.
Well, and that we would write those into whatever work plan comes out of this also.
And that it would be integrated, and Ms. McAlister, I'm looking at you as I say this, integrated into the Lane County strategic plan as tactics and part of strategies fairly broadly that could be accounted for on a regular basis in not just Mo's reporting, but also in our regular strategic plan updates. It could become a part of our strategic plan updates as to how we are working toward the actionable items that are listed in this. Now look at you, Commissioner Bozovich. You always balk a little bit, more than a little bit sometimes, at resolutions because they aren't action. This one was very specifically designed to give guidance toward action. Does it cover you? I'm not going to ask you that question. I'll let you talk later. But Ms. McAlister, you talked a little bit during the Equity and Access Board meeting. The solution was that this is just a starting point. This is a resolution that will provide actionable items inside of existing strategic plans and inside of existing work plans that will provide measurable detail on how we can move forward in a very notable fashion in the county. I'm going to stop right there because I'm piecing together the meeting that the Equity and Access Board, and I wanted to really deliver the spirit of the discussion that they had that really went a little bit beyond just what's in the resolution. Thank you.
Any other comments? Commissioner Bozovich?
Thank you. And I'm going to apologize up front for the length of this statement, as this is a very serious and personal issue to me. And I kind of skipped remonstrance and withheld some comments earlier, hoping I'd have this time. I want to clearly state that I support all of the therefore action statements proposed in this resolution. And I want to state that I fully support the first whereas, acknowledging that Black Lives Matter. I also support the 3rd, 5th, 7th, 8th, and 9th whereas statements as written. I do have some suggested editing for the 2nd, 4th, and 6th because words matter to me. But before I talk about that, I want to talk a little bit about my life experiences so there's clear understanding where I derive my feelings and opinions. My family and I have been in the minority and experienced prejudice. Part of my family crossed the Great Plains as paid Gentile participants of the same wagon train that brought Brigham Young to Salt Lake City. The early Utah Territory was not a friendly place for those that were not part of the LDS Church. My grandfather that married into that family was the son of Slavic immigrants that ended up in Utah mining coal. I grew up in a neighborhood that was more than 90% Jewish as a Gentile. One of my early childhood memories was being one of a handful of children showing up at school on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. All the rest of the kids in my grade school saw each other on Saturdays at Hebrew school and temple. My siblings and I always felt like outsiders without that additional social connection. In my freshman year of college, I had the good fortune to be assigned a Black roommate in my dorm. Robert was a great guy, and his friends introduced me to Bootsy and Parliament and a few other things that widened my view of the world. Throughout my life, I've had many Black friends. I even had 2 Black men as part of my wedding party. It was several months after my wedding, I learned that some of my guests at my wedding would not allow my friends to escort them to their seats, waiting instead for one of my siblings. Racism was alive and well in North Carolina in 1982. Later, I had to plead with my in-laws, a first-generation daughter of Italian immigrants and a World War II veteran whose unit liberated one of the first concentration camps in southern Germany, to accept their daughter, their granddaughter, my niece, was not to be disowned because she was dating a Black man. My niece eventually married that Black man, has had several children, and now my father-in-law adores his great-grandchildren. I know what it is like to be in a minority as an atheist in the Republican Party. None of this experience compares to the experience of Black people. My religious beliefs are not visible as my skin color is. I can pass and go unnoticed. Black people cannot and suffer outright discrimination like my wedding attendants did due to the visible difference they can never hide. I may be of Slavic descent, so named because of the past enslavement by many cultures, but slavery and Jim Crow are not memories of recent generations of my family. I may have been a minority in many situations, but I did not have to deal with people who think they are somehow superior to me based on a few genes difference that control skin color. It is truly unfortunate that some in this country have not risen to the words of Dr. King and learned to judge individuals by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. It is also unfortunate that they have not listened to his words about violence begetting violence. I want to fully support this resolution and board orders, so I have some edits, but I will support it even without the edits. I have a great admiration for the majority of the American people, that they have heard the words of Dr. King and lived by them. I also believe that the majority of the more than 800,000 law enforcement professionals in the United States also live by those words. So I had specific edits I was going to recommend. It's basically changes of 6 words in those 3 whereases. Mo addressed one of them earlier, and I would merely suggest maybe the word murders of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery be converted to killings. But I will go by that because I do agree that it's hard to watch the videos and not come to a similar conclusion. But I am concerned about, affording due process, because I do really pay attention to the Constitution of the United States. As like Steve, I carry that around with me. In fact, it's probably about my 4th copy I've gone through. You know, I did have a little bit of concern about, you know, just a blanket statement of, you know, some kind of profiling and abuse of power going on in Lane County, because it sounded like it was being done officially. And I had some changes in that kind of would make it a broader statement again, that there is racism and discrimination still present in the county. But I am going to just skip over those minor adjustments and allow this to move forward without them, because it is so important to me. I've watched racism personally throughout my life, and it's such a difficult thing to deal with. I can't imagine what it's like to experience the level of racism that Black people do. I hope, though, that most people are like me and have an optimistic view of the American people, that a majority of us are not racist and truly want to follow Dr. King's words. So with that, I'd like to move approval of the board order.
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Bozovich, second by Commissioner Burney. Commissioner Burney, you have your hand up next.
Thank you very much. Oh man, you know what?
Can't see you.
I know. Can you let someone else go if they want to? And I need to plug in, or take a second, either way. Here. What I wanted to say was, first of all, forgive me as I'm doing this while can you see me now?
Yep, we can see you, your armpit.
Thanks, Heather. Okay, first, I really want to acknowledge the power of what Commissioner Bozovich just said, and I know it's sincere and from his heart. And forgive me, but I know you well enough to also know you're not entirely comfortable opening up like that. So thank you very much. And if you don't like being a minority, I think the Democratic Party would welcome you at any point. But seriously, though, as someone who, as a young man, worked with the Black Panther Party in East Oakland in their Intercommunal Youth Institute, which was a fancy term for their daycare center, as someone who, and knew Huey Newton fairly well, as someone who later, as a young man, helped edit scripts, helped facilitate the editing of scripts that Radio Free Europe was sending to apartheid South Africa, specifically to the coloreds in apartheid South Africa, and then helped organize them in that struggle. And as a young man who worked with a guy named John, and by the way, the person who did that, his name was Prexy Nesbitt. He's still alive and he teaches at Chapman College. As a guy that worked and lived for 2 years with John Nisby, who broke the color barrier with a cadre of young Black men for the Washington Redskins in 1962. Forgive me, but I take a little, we should not be working on equity 2.0. We should be working on equity 10.0. We are way behind. Forgive me, but I also, and by the way, I enthusiastically support every word of this resolution. We'll vote for it. And also know that Ms. Young would make things happen whether we did or not. But what I would like to say also is that some of us have been working on these issues for decades, for our lifetimes. We're not starting a process. We are engaged in the process of change, which is the inalienable birthright of every citizen in a democracy. And I'm gratified that people now seem to be coming out of the woodwork and taking a stand. And it's about time. But this is not about making virtue statements. It is about making more equal the distribution of wealth, resources, power, and opportunity in the United States of America. And we are here in Lane County. And in this instance, I see this resolution as critical to facilitating and continuing that process. So I fully support it. Thank you, Chair.
Commissioner Swanson.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to commissioners for your thoughtful comments on this resolution. I just wanted to say a few things. First of all, I want to thank the Equity and Access Board for so promptly working on this, specifically the chair, DJ, who spoke earlier, and Ms. Trigger, who spoke at the public comment. And of course, our staff, Mo Young, who helped work on all this and work through the various statements in the resolution. You know, I was probably raised in one of the whitest counties in the United States, Coos County, Oregon, ironically enough named for the Coos Indians. So I didn't have a lot of experience with discrimination, being discriminated against. Was part of a very dominant white majority. But my eyes were opened significantly when I was watching all of the marches, the civil rights marches, the Martin Luther King Jr. speeches, and the subsequent civil rights marches. And I remember the Neil Young song, Southern Man, which, by the way, is 50 years old this year. It was popular when I was a senior in high school. So my 50th high school reunion is this summer, was going to be this summer. And the Neil Young song, Southern Man, was popular in the spring of that year. But I think what really opened my eyes to all of this really was my work in the Carter administration. I was 8 years after Southern Man came out and I graduated from high school. 8 years later, I was in Greenville, Mississippi, with a delegation of people looking at the economic conditions in the Delta, in the Mississippi Delta, with the big white mansions and the very, very sad shacks behind them. And then another one that was very, very disturbing was I was sent out to the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation in South Dakota, where there had been a gunfight between American Indian movement activists and FBI agents. And it was the poverty there is just unbelievable. So a couple of days ago, my wife was trying to balance our home checkbook, and she said, we paid our bills and we have $300 left, and I want to send it all to the NAACP. And I said, let's do it. So we just, seeing all of the stuff on TV, what can we do? I mean, I'm confined to my house. I'm 69. I have asthma. I cannot be out of my house for health reasons. My daughter mentioned that she's on the street corner in protest of the and in support of the Black Lives Matter. So there's some effort going on out there, at least within our family. And I just wanted to say that, Lane County is named for Joseph Lane, who famously ran for vice president of the United States as an advocate of slavery and Southern secessionism. Fortunately, he wasn't elected vice president, and he was chagrined by the election loss to return to his home in Roseburg, where he lived out his life. I just think we ought to be thinking, why are we named for Joseph Lane? Why aren't we named for some other good Lane that we could find out there? That's what King County, Washington did. They were named for Rufus King, and they didn't want to be known for Rufus King, so they changed their name from King County to King County, and the name King now stands for Martin Luther King Jr. We ought to be thinking about just the very name of our community. And I'll just close by saying that those of you that don't know Neil Young's song, I'm going to read a couple of lines, just a few. Southern man, better keep your head. Don't forget what your good book said. Southern change gonna come at last. Now your crosses are burning fast. Southern man, I saw cotton and I saw black, tall white mansions and little shacks. Southern man, when will you pay them back?
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for your thoughts. One thing that came to my mind when I was reading the resolution under the therefores, because I was really interested in what we can do as action items to follow through with this. And looking at it, the first question that came to my mind is, how are we going to implement this? How are we going to ensure that these 5 items actually get followed through? And I am so pleased with the Equity and Access Board with what they've written. But I also hope that we can engage them more with a plan to actually carry this out. And I think it's also really important that the follow through come to the board on a regular basis. And, you know, as part of the motion, I can't make motions because I'm the chair, but as part of the motion, I think it would make sense if we added some kind of come back to the board quarterly or come back to us at some period increment, so we can be held accountable that we're following through on these particular items. So that is I think a really important part of keeping us moving forward and not just letting other people prod us again and again. That's us saying we want you back actively in front of us. Commissioner Burney.
I seconded and Commissioner Bozievich made the motion. So I would accept that friendly addition, which is a request for regularly coming back and reporting progress if the maker of the motion would accept that.
Yes, I'm willing to accept that.
Commissioner Farr.
Thank you, Chair. And Mr. Mukherjee, when I spoke earlier, I talked specifically about that, about reports back during the annual report and quarterly. Can you say something about how that might occur?
Well, we certainly can do a quarterly report back on, I guess my question for the board is, would you like to have a quarterly report on equity generally that would include follow-ups on the work related to this resolution, or do you want something just focused? And I would just recommend that we do a quarterly update on all of our equity work so that you get the full picture of what's happening and make sure that that update includes work related to this board order.
Thank you, Mr. Mukherjee. And that was what was inherent in what I stated earlier in this discussion today. That you know, the general report on equity, which is Mo's report and Mo's work plan, as additional tactics are added that pertain specifically to this resolution, then you know, that could be forwarded to the board either on a quarterly basis or on an ad hoc basis for that matter. And just making certain that we're on a regular basis apprised of what has been specifically added tactically to our strategic plan and to Mo's work plan regarding this resolution. I think that the general nature of the amended motion gives us that, and it becomes up to you, Mr. Mukherjee, to make sure that that is inherent in the strategic plan and in the work plans and inside of that plan.
So it sounds like we would like to have come back periodically with our equity and access updates. That's the kind of thing that I think would really solidify that the action items stated in the resolution will actually be done.
And Chair Buck, I do believe that covers the spirit of the discussion that I heard on Wednesday night last week at the Equity and Access Board meeting. Thank you.
Very good. Any other discussion? Okay. So we've got a motion on the table with a slight addition of coming back on quarterly reports, or reporting back at quarterly equity and access reports. I'll call for the vote. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 All those opposed, say nay. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you so much, Health and Equity and Access Advisory Committee and Mo Young.
Thank you so much, everyone.
So it's 12:30. We will take a recess here and come back at 1:30 in recess.